What if the story of your ancestors is far more interconnected than you ever imagined? Imagine this, a quiet piece of history, hidden within your very DNA, connecting you to people and places you've never known. What if I told you that millions of people across the globe, perhaps even you, carry fragments of African DNA, woven into the fabric of their being, passed down through generations, through migrations, through history itself? Africa isn't just another continent. It's the continent, the birthplace of humankind. Every person alive today carries a link to Africa in some way. But for millions, there's more. Hidden traces of African ancestry, etched deep in their genetic code. For centuries, these stories were erased, hidden, or forgotten. But today, science is rewriting history, piece by piece, gene by gene. Think about this. What if your DNA could reveal that connection? What if a single discovery could completely transform how you view yourself, your history, and even the world? In this video, we're about to take you on an unforgettable journey. A journey into the untold legacy of African DNA. From its foundational role in the human genome to its hidden influence in unexpected populations across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, we'll uncover the science, the stories, and the stunning revelations reshaping everything we thought we knew about our shared past. So, are you ready to unlock the story your DNA has been waiting to tell? Let's dive in. Africa is often called the cradle of humanity, and for good reason. Around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, in the heart of Africa, modern humans first emerged. This wasn't just an isolated event. It was the beginning of a story that would shape the entire human species. Fossils and genetic studies reveal that all modern humans share a common African origin, making Africa the foundation of who we are today. But what made Africa so unique? The continent's vast landscapes, ranging from dense forests to open savannas, provided the perfect conditions for early humans to develop complex tools, social structures, and ultimately, the ability to migrate. These migrations weren't small. They were monumental. Between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, small groups of humans left Africa, embarking on a journey that would eventually populate every corner of the globe. Here's where it gets fascinating. While some of these early humans ventured out, many stayed behind, leading to extraordinary genetic diversity within Africa itself. In fact, Africans today hold more genetic diversity than any other population on Earth. This diversity reflects the long history of adaptation, innovation, and resilience that took place on the continent. Yet, the legacy of African DNA didn't stop with those early migrations. Even after humans spread across Europe, Asia, and beyond, Africa continued to influence global genetics. Through trade, migrations, and historical events like the Trans-Saharan exchanges and even the Roman Empire's connections with North Africa, the story of African DNA became deeply intertwined with that of the rest of the world. Think about it. The DNA that courses through your veins, no matter where you come from, carries whispers of this ancient history. It's a testament to the fact that humanity's story is one of connection, resilience, and shared origins. But this is just the beginning. What happens when that African legacy intertwines with other cultures and continents? And what secrets can modern science uncover in our genetic code? Let's move deeper into the untold story. When we talk about African DNA, we're not just talking about a single story. It's a tapestry of countless lineages, histories, and adaptations that span over thousands of years. Africa is home to the oldest and most diverse human populations on the planet, and its genetic diversity is unparalleled. Let's break it down. Across the continent, there are more than 2,000 distinct ethnic groups, each with unique cultural and genetic characteristics. This diversity is not just about geography. It's deeply rooted in the continent's history of migration, climate shifts, and even ancient interbreeding events with archaic humans. For example, certain populations in Africa, like the Khorasan people of southern Africa, carry some of the most ancient and genetically distinct lineages in the world. Their DNA offers a window into what humanity might have looked like tens of thousands of years ago, long before the first migrations out of Africa. But it doesn't stop there. Genetic studies reveal fascinating stories of adaptation. Take the East African highlands, where groups like the Amhara and Oromo peoples have developed genetic traits to thrive in low-oxygen environments. Or the Fulani, who are spread across West Africa and have unique genetic signatures tied to their nomadic lifestyle and resistance to diseases like malaria. Even more intriguing is the presence of archaic DNA within modern African genomes. While much of the focus has been on Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA found in non-Africans, researchers are uncovering evidence of ancient interbreeding events between early modern humans and now extinct archaic hominins right within Africa. These traces of archaic DNA remind us that Africa's genetic history is complex and still holds many secrets waiting to be uncovered. And let's not forget the role of migrations. The Bantu expansion, one of the largest human migrations in history, spread agriculture, language, and DNA from West Africa to Eastern and Southern Africa thousands of years ago. This migration not only reshaped the genetic landscape of the continent but also left its mark on populations far beyond Africa. So, why is this diversity so important? It's because African DNA doesn't just represent the past. It holds the key to understanding the future of humanity. From unlocking medical breakthroughs to solving mysteries about our evolutionary history, the genetic wealth within Africa is a treasure trove of untapped potential. And speaking of the global impact of African DNA, it's time to explore how this genetic legacy spread far beyond the borders of the continent. The connections between Africa and the rest of the world run deeper than you might think. The story of African DNA isn't confined to the continent. It has spread across the world, influencing the genetic makeup of populations far beyond its borders. This global reach is a testament to Africa's foundational role in the history of humanity. It all began around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, with the first migrations of modern humans out of Africa. These early adventurers carried with them the genetic legacy of the continent, a legacy that would shape populations across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. But the story doesn't end with that initial migration. It's much richer and far more complex. Take Southern Europe, for example. Studies have shown that populations in countries like Spain, Italy, and Portugal carry a small but significant percentage of sub-Saharan African DNA, dating back to events like the Roman Empire's extensive trade networks and the Moorish rule of Iberia. These genetic traces reveal a history of interactions, trade, and even conquest that tied Africa and Europe together. In the Middle East, the connections are even stronger. Levantine populations, such as those in modern-day Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, show between 4% and 15% African ancestry, likely stemming from migrations, trade, and cultural exchanges over the last 1,000 years. The Arab slave trade also played a role in bringing African genes into the Arabian Peninsula, with traces still visible in the genetic makeup of many populations there today. And then there's the Jewish diaspora. Genetic studies have revealed that Jewish populations from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa all carry between 3% and 5% African ancestry. This shared heritage likely dates back to a common ancestral population, as well as historical interactions during the Roman and biblical periods. The transatlantic slave trade also profoundly shaped the global spread of African DNA. Over 12 million Africans were forcibly taken to the Americas, where their descendants have created vibrant, diverse communities across North and South America and the Caribbean. Today, African ancestry is a core part of the genetic identity of populations in places like Brazil, Haiti, and the United States, where millions of people trace their roots back to the African continent. Even in regions where African ancestry might seem unexpected, such as parts of Asia, there are fascinating genetic connections. Communities like the Siddhis in India and Pakistan are descendants of Africans who arrived as traders, soldiers, or enslaved people centuries ago. Despite their small numbers, they have preserved a cultural and genetic legacy that bridges Africa and South Asia. These connections remind us that the human story is one of movement, connection, and shared heritage. African DNA serves as a common thread, linking diverse populations and revealing a history of interdependence and exchange. But as we reflect on the global impact of African DNA, it's equally important to consider the challenges faced by those who carry this legacy. From the erasure of identity to the ongoing fight for recognition, the story of African DNA is as much about resilience as it is about heritage. Next, we'll explore how African DNA has played a pivotal role in shaping modern science, medicine, and our understanding of human evolution. Stay tuned as we uncover why this legacy is more relevant than ever in today's world. The story of African DNA doesn't just connect us to the past, it's also shaping the future. In the fields of genetics, medicine, and anthropology, the contribution of African DNA is groundbreaking, offering insights that could transform how we understand humanity and solve some of the most pressing health challenges of our time. First, let's talk about genetics. Africa is the birthplace of modern humans, and as a result, it's home to the most genetically diverse populations on Earth. In fact, a single African village can contain more genetic variation than the entire population of Europe. This diversity is a goldmine for researchers, helping us map the human genome more comprehensively and uncover variations that might otherwise remain hidden. For example, researchers studying African genomes have identified genetic adaptations linked to resistance against diseases like malaria and sleeping sickness. These findings aren't just important for understanding African populations, they are critical for global health. Malaria alone kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, and studying how African populations have adapted to this disease could pave the way for more effective treatments and vaccines. African DNA is also helping scientists understand how humans adapt to extreme environments. Take the Amhara people of Ethiopia, who have genetic adaptations allowing them to thrive at high altitudes with low oxygen levels. These genetic traits, which evolved over thousands of years, are shedding light on how the human body can adapt to some of the harshest conditions on Earth. But it's not just about adaptation, it's also about innovation. African DNA is playing a pivotal role in personalized medicine, a cutting-edge field that tailors treatments to an individual's genetic makeup. This approach has the potential to revolutionize healthcare, but here's the challenge. Most existing genetic research has focused on European populations, leaving African populations underrepresented. This lack of representation can lead to treatments that are less effective, or even harmful, for people of African descent. That's starting to change. Initiatives like the Human Heredity and Health in Africa Project, or H3 Africa, are working to close the gap by studying the genetic diversity of African populations. These efforts aren't just benefiting Africans, they are benefiting the entire world by making genetic research more inclusive and comprehensive. Even beyond medicine, African DNA is helping us solve some of the biggest mysteries about our origins. For decades, scientists have debated where and how modern humans evolved, and African DNA is providing the answers. From ancient DNA found in Ethiopian highlands to the remains of the Green Sahara populations, these discoveries are rewriting the story of human evolution, showing us how our ancestors survived, thrived, and spread across the globe. Perhaps the most exciting part of this journey is the potential for the future. By studying African DNA, we're not only unlocking the secrets of the past, we're also gaining tools to tackle the challenges of tomorrow. From new vaccines to breakthroughs in genetic engineering, the possibilities are endless. And yet, as we look to the future, it's vital to approach this research with respect and integrity. Genetic studies have the power to empower communities, but they also carry the risk of exploitation. That's why initiatives led by African scientists and researchers are so important. They ensure that the benefits of genetic discoveries are shared equitably and that the legacy of African DNA is honored, not appropriated. The story of African DNA is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. Every discovery, every breakthrough, brings us closer to understanding who we are, not just as individuals, but as a species. And at the heart of it all is Africa, the cradle of humanity, whose genetic legacy continues to inspire and shape the future. Next, we'll wrap up with a reflection on how the legacy of African DNA challenges us to rethink identity, heritage, and what it truly means to be human. The story of African DNA is far more than a scientific exploration. It's a powerful reminder of our shared humanity. When we look at the legacy of African DNA, we're confronted with a profound truth. Despite our surface differences, we are all deeply connected. Think about this. Every person alive today can trace their ancestry back to Africa. No matter where your family comes from, whether it's the bustling streets of Europe, the vast plains of Asia, or the islands of the Pacific, your story began in Africa. This is where our species took its first steps, where we survived and adapted, and where we evolved into the diverse, creative beings we are today. But African DNA doesn't just connect us, it challenges us. It pushes us to rethink rigid ideas about race, identity, and heritage. For centuries, we've relied on labels to divide ourselves: white, black, European, African, Asian. Yet, as genetic research shows us, these categories are far more fluid than we imagined. The truth is, race is a social construct, not a biological one. Beneath our skin, we share 99.9% of the same DNA. That 0.1% that makes us unique is a testament to humanity's incredible diversity, not its division. This story also forces us to confront uncomfortable chapters in history. The traces of African DNA found in people who identify as white, for example, are a stark reminder of slavery's dark legacy and the generations of exploitation that shaped our societies. But these genetic threads also carry stories of resilience and survival. They remind us that history is not just a series of events. It lives within us, in our blood, in our genes, in who we are. At the same time, African DNA offers a message of empowerment. It reminds African-descended people across the world of their rich heritage, a heritage that predates colonialism and slavery by tens of thousands of years. It's a heritage that speaks of great civilizations, profound knowledge, and the unmatched resilience of a continent that has shaped the world in ways most people don't even realize. So, what does this mean for all of us? First, it means embracing the complexity of identity. We are not just one thing, we are many things. Our DNA tells a story that spans continents, generations, and millennia. It's a story of migration, mixing, and survival. And that's something to celebrate. Second, it means approaching the study of genetics with care and respect. DNA is not just data. It's the story of people, cultures, and histories. As we uncover these stories, we have a responsibility to ensure that the benefits of genetic research are shared equitably and that no group is exploited in the process. Finally, the legacy of African DNA challenges us to reimagine what it means to be human. It reminds us that our differences are not weaknesses, they are strengths. Our diversity is what allowed us to adapt, to innovate, to thrive. And at the root of that diversity is Africa, the cradle of humanity. As we close this journey, ask yourself, how does your story connect to the larger human story? What does your DNA say about who you are and where you come from? And how can the knowledge of our shared ancestry bring us closer together? The legacy of African DNA is, ultimately, a legacy of connection. It's a story that reminds us that we are all threads in the same vast, intricate tapestry. And in a world that often feels divided, that's a truth worth holding on to. Have you ever wondered how the DNA of a population from over 1,000 years ago could still influence the way we live today? The Anglo-Saxons were more than just a chapter in Britain's history. They were the architects of profound cultural, social, and even genetic transformations. But here's the fascinating part. Their DNA holds secrets that have puzzled historians and scientists for centuries. What makes it so unique? Is it the story of mass migrations that reshaped the British Isles? The blending of ancient cultures through intermarriage? Or could it be the incredible technological breakthroughs that allow us to trace these stories through strands of ancient DNA? In this video, we'll uncover the mysteries of Anglo-Saxon genetics and how their legacy remains imprinted in modern Britain. From mass migrations to cultural fusion, their DNA offers a window into one of history's most transformative eras. So, if you've ever wanted to understand how the past shapes the present, or even the people you see around you, stay tuned. What you're about to learn might just change the way you see history forever. To understand what makes Anglo-Saxon DNA so unique, we need to journey back to the 5th century, a time when Britain was on the brink of transformation. The Roman Empire, which had ruled for nearly 4 centuries, had abandoned the island by 410 CE. What they left behind was a land in turmoil, a power vacuum ripe for change. Enter the Anglo-Saxons, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who came from what is now Denmark, northern Germany, and the Netherlands. These were seafaring tribes, skilled warriors, and farmers who brought with them not just their tools and weapons, but also their culture, language, and, most importantly, their DNA. Historical accounts like those of the Venerable Bede tell us that these groups arrived in waves, establishing settlements and transforming Britain's linguistic and cultural landscape. But for centuries, one question loomed. How significant was their arrival? Were they conquerors who displaced the native Britons? Or were they just a small ruling elite, gradually influencing local communities? This debate persisted until recent advancements in genetic science gave us the ability to examine ancient DNA. The findings, far more dramatic than anyone imagined. Anglo-Saxon migrations didn't just influence Britain, they fundamentally reshaped its genetic foundation, particularly in the East. As we delve deeper into the genetic story of the Anglo-Saxons, you'll see how their arrival marked one of the most profound shifts in British history, one that can still be traced in the DNA of millions of people today. What truly sets Anglo-Saxon DNA apart is how it represents one of the most significant genetic transformations in British history. Scientists analyzing ancient DNA from skeletons have uncovered something astonishing. By the early Middle Ages, over 75% of the ancestry of people in eastern England came from regions across the North Sea, including modern-day Denmark, the Netherlands, and northern Germany. This genetic shift is striking because it's a dramatic departure from what came before. Before the Anglo-Saxon migrations, Britain's population was largely Celtic in ancestry, shaped by millennia of local traditions and earlier influences, including the Romans. But the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons brought a wave of northern European genetics that blended with the local population, creating something entirely new. What's even more fascinating is the precision of these discoveries. Using advanced ancient DNA techniques, researchers extracted genetic material from nearly 500 individuals from across Britain and Europe. They found that early Anglo-Saxon DNA had a unique fingerprint, closely tied to the coastal regions bordering the North Sea. In other words, their DNA reveals exactly where they came from and how they spread across Britain. But what makes this DNA so unique isn't just where it came from. It's how it blended with the existing population. Unlike earlier migrations that often left little genetic trace, the Anglo-Saxon arrival fundamentally reshaped the genetic makeup of Britain, particularly in eastern and southern England. The result? A population that was not only diverse but regionally distinct. Even today, you can see this genetic legacy in modern Britons. The DNA of people in eastern England, for example, still retains a stronger Anglo-Saxon signature than those in the West. This blend of local and migrant DNA is one of the most fascinating aspects of this story, and it's just the beginning of what their genetics can reveal. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have debated the scale of the Anglo-Saxon migration. Were they a small, elite group that imposed their culture on the local Britons? Or was it a large-scale migration that completely transformed the population? Earlier theories suggested that only a small number of Anglo-Saxon warriors arrived and gradually spread their influence through power and status. But this theory left many unanswered questions. Why would the genetic makeup of eastern England show such a massive shift? And why do historical records like those from the Venerable Bede describe the arrival of entire tribes, not just soldiers? The real breakthrough came with the advent of ancient DNA analysis. By sequencing the genomes of hundreds of early medieval skeletons, scientists uncovered undeniable evidence. This wasn't just a trickle of migrants, it was a flood. Entire families, including men, women, and children, traveled across the North Sea to settle in Britain. Their DNA tells us that this was a large-scale migration that fundamentally reshaped the genetic landscape. Cemeteries like those in Buckland and Oakington provide even more insight. Here, researchers discovered graves containing both Anglo-Saxon migrants and local Britons, buried side by side. This suggests that the migration wasn't simply a violent takeover. Instead, there was intermarriage and cultural blending, leading to a more complex and nuanced integration. What's even more intriguing is the role women played in this migration. Genetic evidence reveals that women were just as involved as men, traveling with their families and contributing equally to the genetic legacy. This challenges the traditional narrative of male-dominated invasions and highlights the importance of entire communities in shaping this transformative period. In the end, the evidence points to a migration on an unprecedented scale, one that was both cultural and biological. The Anglo-Saxon story is no longer about a small elite imposing their will. It's about waves of people who came to Britain, intermingled with the locals, and left an indelible mark on history and genetics. One of the most fascinating aspects of Anglo-Saxon DNA is how its influence varied across Britain. The genetic legacy of these migrants wasn't uniform. It was shaped by geography, culture, and local dynamics. In eastern England, the heartland of Anglo-Saxon settlement, their genetic impact was the most profound. Studies show that up to 76% of the ancestry of early medieval populations in this region came from northern European migrants. This is where the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes established their largest settlements, and their DNA became deeply embedded in the local population. But as you move westward, the story changes. In areas like Wales, Scotland, and Western England, the genetic influence of the Anglo-Saxons diminishes significantly. These regions retained a much stronger connection to their Celtic ancestry, with far less integration of Anglo-Saxon DNA. For example, at Worth Matravers in Dorset, researchers found almost no evidence of continental ancestry, showing that some communities remained relatively untouched by the migration. Even within Anglo-Saxon settlements, there were variations. At Appledown in Sussex, for instance, burials revealed a stark divide between people of local ancestry and those of migrant origin. These two groups were buried with distinct practices, suggesting some level of social separation. Contrast that with sites like Buckland in Kent, where Anglo-Saxon migrants and locals intermarried and were buried together, reflecting a higher degree of integration. This regional variation tells a nuanced story. The Anglo-Saxon migration wasn't a one-size-fits-all event. In some areas, it led to widespread integration and cultural blending. In others, local populations maintained their distinct identities. What's remarkable is how these patterns are still reflected in modern DNA. People in eastern England today retain a stronger Anglo-Saxon genetic signature, while those in the West are more closely tied to ancient Celtic populations. This diversity is a testament to the complex and varied ways in which the Anglo-Saxon migrations shaped Britain, and it underscores just how unique their DNA truly is. When we think of migration in the early Middle Ages, it's easy to imagine armies of men crossing the seas in search of new lands. But the reality of the Anglo-Saxon migration tells a very different story, one in which women played a crucial and often overlooked role. Genetic studies reveal something remarkable. The migration wasn't just about warriors or elite men. Entire families made the journey from regions like Denmark, northern Germany, and the Netherlands. The evidence is clear. Women were just as present as men in these migrations, and they played an essential role in shaping the genetic and cultural legacy of Anglo-Saxon Britain. One of the most fascinating discoveries comes from the burial sites. Women of Anglo-Saxon descent were often buried with elaborate grave goods, such as brooches, beads, and ornate jewelry, signifying high social status. This contrasts with women of local ancestry, who were less frequently buried with such items. It suggests that women from migrant families may have held prominent roles within their communities, possibly as cultural or social leaders. Take, for example, the findings from sites like Oakington and Dover Buckland. In these cemeteries, researchers uncovered graves of Anglo-Saxon women adorned with intricate items that highlight their importance. These women weren't just passive participants in migration. They were integral to the formation of new communities. But it wasn't only about material wealth. The DNA evidence shows that women were pivotal in the integration between Anglo-Saxon migrants and local Britons. Through intermarriage, they helped bridge two distinct genetic and cultural groups, blending them into a shared heritage. Family trees reconstructed from ancient DNA reveal generations of mixed ancestry, with women passing on their genetic legacy and cultural practices. What's particularly striking is how these findings challenge traditional narratives of male-dominated invasions. The Anglo-Saxon migration wasn't a story of conquerors and the conquered. It was a story of entire communities, where women played an equal and vital role in shaping the future. The presence and contributions of women are a key reason why the Anglo-Saxon migration was so transformative, both genetically and culturally. Without them, the unique legacy of the Anglo-Saxons wouldn't have been possible. One of the most captivating aspects of the Anglo-Saxon migration is how it reshaped the social and cultural fabric of Britain. This wasn't a simple story of conquest or domination. It was one of interaction, integration, and, in some cases, separation. As Anglo-Saxon migrants arrived and settled, they didn't remain isolated. Evidence from burial sites shows that local Britons and new arrivals often lived side by side. At cemeteries like Buckland in Kent and Oakington in Cambridgeshire, graves of individuals with local and migrant ancestry are found together, indicating a high degree of social integration. In these communities, intermarriage blurred the lines between the two groups, creating a shared genetic and cultural identity. But integration wasn't universal. At Appledown in Sussex, the story is different. People with Anglo-Saxon ancestry were buried separately from those with local ancestry, using distinct burial styles. This suggests that, in some regions, social boundaries remained intact for generations. These variations tell us that integration wasn't a uniform process. It depended on local dynamics, cultural preferences, and even the fortunes of individual families. What's especially fascinating is how this cultural exchange went both ways. Anglo-Saxon migrants brought with them new traditions, languages, and technologies that transformed Britain. Their distinctive burial practices, clothing styles, and even agricultural methods became widespread. At the same time, local Britons retained elements of their own identity, such as Celtic place names and artistic styles, which persisted alongside these new influences. Family trees reconstructed through ancient DNA provide a vivid picture of this blending. In one case at Buckland, researchers traced a family over 4 generations, showing how a woman with local ancestry married into an Anglo-Saxon family. Over time, their descendants inherited a mix of genetic and cultural traits, reflecting the gradual merging of the two groups. These findings reveal a rich and complex picture of Anglo-Saxon society. Migration wasn't just about the movement of people. It was about the exchange of ideas, customs, and traditions that shaped the communities they formed. The story of the Anglo-Saxons reminds us that history isn't just about conflicts or conquests. It's about the connections people make and the ways they adapt to new environments and cultures. This cultural fusion is a key reason why the Anglo-Saxon period remains such a transformative chapter in British history. The legacy of Anglo-Saxon DNA isn't just buried in the past. It's alive in the genetic makeup of modern Britons. Although over 1,000 years have passed since the Anglo-Saxon migrations, their genetic impact remains surprisingly visible. On average, about 30 to 40% of the DNA of modern English people can be traced back to the Anglo-Saxons. This proportion varies significantly across regions. In eastern England, where the Anglo-Saxon settlements were strongest, their genetic influence is the highest. In contrast, as you move westward to areas like Wales, Scotland, and parts of western England, the impact is much smaller, with these regions retaining more of their ancient Celtic ancestry. But what's truly fascinating is how the genetic story didn't stop with the Anglo-Saxons. Over the centuries, other waves of migration and conquest brought new influences. One major contributor was the arrival of people with ancestry linked to France and Belgium, particularly during the Norman period and beyond. Today, this component makes up 20 to 40% of modern English DNA, further blending the genetic tapestry. This ongoing gene flow highlights how migration has always been a defining feature of Britain's history. The Anglo-Saxon migration was one of the largest and most transformative, but it was part of a longer narrative of movement, interaction, and integration. What makes this legacy even more remarkable is how it aligns with cultural patterns. For example, regions with a stronger Anglo-Saxon genetic influence are often the same areas where Old English, the ancestor of modern English, took root most strongly. Even today, subtle differences in regional dialects and traditions reflect the diverse history of migration and cultural exchange. The genetic legacy of the Anglo-Saxons serves as a reminder that modern identities are deeply intertwined with the past. Our DNA is a living record of the migrations, adaptations, and connections that shape the world we live in today. It's a story that continues to unfold, as new genetic studies reveal even more about the people who helped build the foundation of modern Britain. The secrets of Anglo-Saxon DNA didn't come to light overnight. It took groundbreaking advancements in science to unlock the stories hidden in ancient bones. Until recently, much of what we knew about the Anglo-Saxon period came from historical accounts and archaeological findings. But ancient DNA technology has changed everything, allowing us to see history in ways we never thought possible. The process begins with tiny fragments of bone or teeth, often buried for over 1,000 years. Scientists carefully extract DNA using methods designed to preserve its delicate structure. Imagine drilling into a bone no larger than your finger and pulling out microscopic strands of DNA, fragments so ancient they've been damaged by time, environment, and decay. But that's just the start. Once extracted, the DNA is sequenced and compared to genetic profiles from both ancient and modern populations. This is where the real magic happens. By analyzing thousands of genetic markers, researchers can pinpoint where a person's ancestors came from and how they fit into the larger tapestry of human history. The Anglo-Saxon studies were particularly challenging because their DNA isn't vastly different from that of neighboring populations in Europe. The North Sea region, encompassing parts of Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany, was genetically interconnected, making it difficult to distinguish one group from another. But by analyzing rare mutations and studying nearly 500 ancient genomes, scientists were able to identify the unique genetic signature of the Anglo-Saxons. What these studies revealed was astonishing. a massive influx of people from the continent, bringing with them not only their genes but also their culture. Family trees reconstructed from ancient DNA showed how migrants and locals intermarried, blending their genetic and cultural legacies over generations. This technology didn't just confirm historical accounts, it challenged and refined them. For example, we now know that the Anglo-Saxon migration wasn't just a conquest led by warriors. It was a movement of families, men, women, and children, who settled, integrated, and shaped the future of Britain. Ancient DNA has allowed us to rewrite the story of the Anglo-Saxons, giving us a clearer picture of who they were and how they lived. It's a testament to how science can illuminate the past, uncovering details that were once lost to history. And as techniques continue to improve, who knows what other secrets might still be hidden in the DNA of the long dead. So why does Anglo-Saxon DNA still matter today? The answer lies in what it tells us about migration, identity, and the shared history of humanity. The story of the Anglo-Saxons isn't just a chapter in British history. It's a mirror reflecting how migration has shaped societies across the globe. Their DNA reveals that migration isn't simply about borders or territory. It's about transformation. The Anglo-Saxon arrival didn't just bring new genetics to Britain. It introduced new languages, customs, and technologies that formed the foundation of modern England. But their story also challenges some deeply rooted misconceptions about migration. The evidence shows that it wasn't just a tale of conquerors imposing their culture. Instead, it was a process of integration, adaptation, and cultural exchange. Anglo-Saxon migrants didn't erase what came before them. They blended with it, creating something entirely new. This is a message that resonates today. In an increasingly interconnected world, the story of the Anglo-Saxons reminds us that cultural diversity and genetic mixing have always been part of human history. It shows us that migration is a natural and even transformative force, shaping not just who we are, but who we become. On a scientific level, the study of Anglo-Saxon DNA represents a triumph of modern technology. It's a testament to how far we've come in understanding the past. With just fragments of bone, scientists have reconstructed a story that was once thought to be lost forever. But perhaps the most powerful lesson lies in how these discoveries connect the past to the present. The DNA of the Anglo-Saxons isn't just a record of who they were. It's part of who we are today. Their genetic legacy lives on in millions of modern Britons, a reminder that our history is written not just in books, but in our very genes. So, the next time you think about history, remember this. It's not just something that happened. It's something that lives on, in our cultures, our languages, and even in the DNA that makes us who we are. The legacy of Anglo-Saxon DNA goes far beyond genetics. It's a story of transformation, connection, and identity that continues to shape Britain today. At its core, Anglo-Saxon DNA is a testament to how migrations have the power to redefine entire societies. The Anglo-Saxon arrival didn't just bring new bloodlines to Britain. It laid the groundwork for the English language, social structures, and cultural traditions that still endure. The customs, burial practices, and technologies they introduced didn't simply fade away. They became part of the fabric of English identity. But this legacy is also a reminder of how interconnected our histories are. The Anglo-Saxons were migrants, travelers from the North Sea region who came to Britain in search of new opportunities. Their DNA ties modern Britons not just to this island but to regions like Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. It's a powerful example of how migration has always been a part of humanity's story, bridging distances and connecting cultures. Even today, the impact of Anglo-Saxon DNA is visible. Regions of eastern England still carry a stronger genetic imprint of the Anglo-Saxons, while western areas reflect a more Celtic influence. This genetic diversity is a living record of Britain's complex and layered history. Perhaps what makes their legacy most remarkable is the blend of continuity and change. The Anglo-Saxons didn't erase what came before them. Instead, they became part of a larger, evolving story, a story that includes the Celts, the Romans, the Vikings, and many others. Their DNA is a thread in the rich tapestry of Britain's history, connecting the past to the present in a way that's both tangible and profound. Ultimately, the Anglo-Saxon story reminds us that history isn't static, it's dynamic, evolving, and deeply personal. It's a story of movement, adaptation, and resilience. And thanks to advances in genetic science, we now know that their DNA lives on, not just in the people of Britain, but in the legacy of cultural and social transformation they helped create. So, as we look to the future, the story of the Anglo-Saxons serves as a powerful reminder of the connections that bind us all. Their legacy isn't just about where they came from, it's about what they built, and how their influence continues to shape the world we live in today. The story of Anglo-Saxon DNA is more than just a scientific discovery. It's a window into our shared human history. It reminds us how migration, integration, and cultural exchange have always been essential to the evolution of societies. The Anglo-Saxons weren't just invaders or settlers. They were contributors to a new chapter in Britain's story, leaving behind a genetic and cultural legacy that continues to influence the present. But what makes this story so compelling is how it bridges the past and the present. The advanced technologies used to decode ancient DNA have given us the tools to uncover stories once thought lost to time. They revealed not only where the Anglo-Saxons came from, but also how they lived, how they integrated with local communities, and how their influence endures today. So, what can we learn from this? First, history is rarely as simple as we think. The Anglo-Saxon period wasn't just about conquest or dominance, it was about transformation, collaboration, and resilience. Second, our identities are more interconnected than we realize. The DNA of the Anglo-Saxons serves as a powerful reminder that we are all shaped by migrations and exchanges that stretch back centuries. As we reflect on this, let's ask ourselves, what other stories might be hidden in the DNA of our ancestors? And how might those stories change the way we see ourselves and the world around us? If you found this journey into the past fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What surprised you the most about the Anglo-Saxons? And what part of this story do you want to explore further? Let us know. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of history, science, and culture. Until next time, stay curious, because the stories of the past are never truly finished. They are waiting to be discovered. Have you ever wondered how some people thrive in conditions where survival seems nearly impossible? Imagine living your entire life surrounded by towering mountains, freezing winds, and air so thin it feels like you're breathing through a straw. For most of us, even a short visit to such an environment would be a struggle. But for the Himalayan people, it's home, a place where they not only survive but thrive. What makes this possible? Is it sheer determination, centuries of adaptation, or something far more profound, something encoded in their DNA? The answer lies in a genetic story that stretches back tens of thousands of years. The Himalayan region is a land of extremes, home to the world's highest peaks. It pushes the limits of what humans can endure. The air at these altitudes holds 40% less oxygen than at sea level, temperatures plummet below freezing, and resources are scarce. Yet, despite these challenges, the people of the Himalayas have built lives here, thriving in conditions that would leave most of us gasping for breath. What's even more fascinating is that their ability to adapt isn't just a product of the environment, it's deeply rooted in their biology. Over thousands of years, natural selection has fine-tuned their genetic makeup, equipping them with unique traits that make survival at these altitudes not only possible but almost effortless. But how did this happen? What secrets are hidden within their DNA? And how did they evolve to become the masters of the mountains? As we unravel their genetic history, we'll uncover answers that not only reveal the resilience of the human spirit but also hold the potential to revolutionize our understanding of health, biology, and even the future of our species. Stay with us as we embark on a journey into the heart of the Himalayas, a journey to uncover the genetic secrets that have shaped these remarkable people and allowed them to flourish in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Because sometimes, the answers to life's greatest mysteries aren't written in books. They are written in our very DNA. To truly understand the genetic secrets of the Himalayan people, we first need to ask a fundamental question: where did they come from? Their story begins long before villages dotted the valleys or monasteries clung to the cliffs. It's a journey that spans tens of thousands of years, shaped by migrations, isolation, and survival in the face of harsh environments. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern humans first entered the Himalayas around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. These early pioneers likely followed rivers and valleys into the mountains, drawn by the promise of resources and shelter. But these weren't just any humans. They carried with them genetic adaptations inherited from a mysterious and now extinct group known as the Denisovans. A fragment of a Denisovan jawbone discovered in Tibet revealed their ancient presence in these high-altitude regions. What makes this discovery so groundbreaking is the role Denisovans played in shaping the genetics of today's Himalayan people. A specific gene, EPAS1, critical for surviving at high altitudes, was passed from Denisovans to modern humans through interbreeding. This genetic hand-me-down has been called one of the strongest examples of beneficial archaic introgression, a rare but powerful inheritance from an ancient cousin species. Fast forward to around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, and the Himalayan region began to see more permanent human presence. Genetic studies show that populations migrating from northern China, particularly those linked to the Yellow River Basin, began making their way into the Tibetan plateau. These early settlers likely brought with them critical skills like farming and animal domestication, which allowed them to establish villages even in the most unforgiving conditions. But the Himalayas didn't just see a one-way influx of people. Genetic data also shows that around 6,000 to 3,000 years ago, populations on the southern slopes of the Himalayas began mixing with groups from South Asia. This southward gene flow introduced new genetic diversity. But it's important to note that the high-altitude populations, such as the Sherpa and Tibetan people, remained relatively isolated. This isolation played a key role in preserving the genetic adaptations they had inherited and developed over millennia. What's even more fascinating is that the Himalayan people's genetic profile reflects a delicate balance between ancient ancestry and continuous adaptation. Studies of mitochondrial DNA, passed down through maternal lines, and Y-chromosomal DNA, inherited from fathers, reveal a mix of East Asian and South Asian lineages, yet with unique markers found only in the Himalayas. These markers tell a story of ancient bottlenecks, where small, isolated populations survived and thrived despite the odds. So, who are the Himalayan people? They are a living tapestry, woven from threads of Denisovan legacy, northern migrations, and southern influences. Each thread tells a story of survival, adaptation, and resilience in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But their genetic story doesn't end here. In fact, it's just the beginning. As we move deeper into the DNA of these remarkable people, we'll uncover the incredible ways their genes have been fine-tuned for life at extreme altitudes. From oxygen absorption to energy metabolism, their biology holds secrets that could change the way we understand human adaptation. Stay with us as we move closer to the heart of this genetic puzzle. Because the question isn't just where the Himalayan people came from. It's how their ancient journey shaped the biology that allows them to thrive where others struggle to survive. The Himalayan people's story begins thousands of years ago, long before the region became home to the towering peaks we know today. This story is etched not just into history but into their very DNA, a genetic timeline that reveals how they came to inhabit one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Around 40,000 years ago, the first modern humans began migrating out of Africa, spreading across continents and adapting to a variety of environments. Some ventured into East Asia, a journey that would eventually lead their descendants to the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas. But this migration wasn't a straightforward path. For thousands of years, these ancient populations lived in lower-altitude regions, developing agricultural practices and cultural identities that would shape their societies. So when did humans first venture into the Himalayas? Archaeological evidence suggests that permanent habitation above 2,500 meters began roughly 5,200 years ago, coinciding with the introduction of millet farming. However, genetic evidence tells an even richer story. Studies reveal that ancestors of the Himalayan people began adapting to high-altitude conditions as far back as 10,000 years ago, thousands of years before permanent villages were established. This genetic adaptation hints at seasonal migrations or temporary settlements in these regions, where natural selection quietly began its work. What's most fascinating is how these populations interacted with their environment. The harsh conditions of the Himalayas acted as a filter, shaping the genetic makeup of those who stayed. One of the most critical turning points in this journey was the introduction of barley and sheep around 3,600 years ago, both of which were crucial for sustaining life at altitudes of 3,500 meters and above. These innovations marked the true beginning of permanent high-altitude habitation. But where did these early settlers come from? Genetic studies show a deep connection to East Asian populations, particularly those living along the Yellow River in China. Populations from the upper and middle Yellow River region carried genetic traits that would later become critical for survival in the Himalayas. Over time, this East Asian ancestry mixed with local groups, creating a unique genetic profile found only in the people of the Himalayas. Interestingly, these populations didn't remain isolated. Trade routes through the Himalayan valleys brought cultural exchanges and occasional genetic contributions from South Asia and Central Asia. However, despite these interactions, the core genetic identity of the Himalayan people remained remarkably stable over thousands of years. This genetic resilience speaks to the power of natural selection in shaping their ability to thrive at high altitudes. Today, the DNA of the Himalayan people carries the echoes of their ancestors' journey, a journey that spans tens of thousands of years, countless migrations, and incredible challenges. Their story is a testament to human adaptability, revealing how the forces of nature and culture have worked together to shape one of the most unique populations in the world. But this is just the beginning. Next, we'll dive deeper into the genetic adaptations that make the Himalayan people true masters of high-altitude living. These adaptations not only define their identity but also offer a window into the extraordinary power of evolution. The human body is an extraordinary machine, capable of adapting to almost any environment on Earth. But the Himalayas are no ordinary place. With oxygen levels at high altitudes nearly 40% lower than at sea level and frigid temperatures year-round, surviving here requires more than just physical endurance. It demands genetic innovation. So, how have the Himalayan people managed to thrive in such extreme conditions? The answer lies in their DNA. Unlike many lowlanders, whose bodies struggle to adjust to high-altitude hypoxia, Himalayan populations like the Sherpa and Tibetans have evolved unique genetic traits that allow them to live, work, and even excel at altitudes of 3,000 meters or higher. One of the most fascinating genetic adaptations is linked to the EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super athlete gene. This gene plays a key role in regulating hemoglobin levels in the blood, which is crucial for transporting oxygen. In most humans, exposure to high altitudes triggers a spike in hemoglobin production to compensate for reduced oxygen levels. But too much hemoglobin can make the blood thick and sluggish, increasing the risk of life-threatening conditions like blood clots. Himalayan populations, however, possess a unique version of the EPAS1 gene that prevents this dangerous overproduction of hemoglobin. This adaptation is a game-changer, allowing them to maintain normal blood flow and oxygen delivery even in low-oxygen environments. What's truly remarkable is that this genetic variant is not of entirely modern human origin. It was inherited through an ancient interbreeding event with Denisovans, a now-extinct hominin species. This discovery not only highlights the power of archaic genes but also sheds light on how modern humans have borrowed survival tools from their ancient relatives. Another key adaptation is linked to the EGLN1 gene, which is involved in sensing oxygen levels in the body. This gene has undergone significant natural selection in the Himalayan populations, optimizing their cellular response to hypoxia. By fine-tuning the body's reaction to low oxygen, this genetic trait helps prevent common high-altitude illnesses, such as chronic mountain sickness. But the genetic story doesn't stop there. Himalayan populations also show adaptations in genes associated with energy metabolism, allowing their bodies to extract and utilize energy more efficiently. For example, variations in the TBC1D1 gene have been linked to improved glucose and lipid metabolism, providing a steady energy supply in an environment where food can be scarce and temperatures demand high caloric output. These metabolic efficiencies not only support physical activity but also reduce the risk of cold stress. Interestingly, the adaptations don't just stop at oxygen and energy. Himalayan populations have also evolved genetic traits that enhance immune function and UV protection. Variants in genes like GNPAT and ZBTB20 may play a role in shielding cells from the harsh effects of ultraviolet radiation, which is more intense at higher altitudes. Combined, these adaptations create a biological toolkit that has allowed the Himalayan people to overcome challenges that would overwhelm most humans. So, how long did it take for these adaptations to develop? The evidence suggests that the EPAS1 variant first appeared in Denisovans over 40,000 years ago and entered the modern human gene pool through interbreeding. From there, natural selection took over, favoring individuals with these beneficial traits as they migrated into high-altitude regions. Over the past 10,000 years, these genetic adaptations have become deeply embedded in the Himalayan gene pool, providing a clear example of evolution in action. What's even more fascinating is that these adaptations are not limited to one group. While the Sherpa and Tibetans are the most studied, other Himalayan populations, such as the Layap and Kurtop in Bhutan, and the Thakali and Gael in Nepal, also carry similar genetic signatures. These populations have developed their own unique combinations of adaptations, shaped by local environmental pressures and historical migrations. But what can we learn from these extraordinary genetic traits? Scientists believe that understanding how the Himalayan people have adapted to high-altitude living could have real-world applications for medicine and health. For instance, insights into the EPAS1 and EGLN1 genes could help develop treatments for conditions like chronic hypoxia and altitude sickness, which affect millions of people worldwide. Ultimately, the genetic adaptations of the Himalayan people are more than just a survival mechanism. They are a testament to the power of evolution and the resilience of the human species. In the face of some of the harshest conditions on Earth, these populations have not only survived but thrived, paving the way for new discoveries in biology, medicine, and anthropology. And their story doesn't end here. In the next section, we'll explore how the cultural practices, trade, and interactions of the Himalayan people have intertwined with their genetic history to shape their identity today. The human body is an extraordinary machine, capable of adapting to almost any environment on Earth. But the Himalayas are no ordinary place. With oxygen levels at high altitudes nearly 40% lower than at sea level and frigid temperatures year-round, surviving here requires more than just physical endurance. It demands genetic innovation. So, how have the Himalayan people managed to thrive in such extreme conditions? The answer lies in their DNA. Unlike many lowlanders, whose bodies struggle to adjust to high-altitude hypoxia, Himalayan populations like the Sherpa and Tibetans have evolved unique genetic traits that allow them to live, work, and even excel at altitudes of 3,000 meters or higher. One of the most fascinating genetic adaptations is linked to the EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super athlete gene. This gene plays a key role in regulating hemoglobin levels in the blood, which is crucial for transporting oxygen. In most humans, exposure to high altitudes triggers a spike in hemoglobin production to compensate for reduced oxygen levels. But too much hemoglobin can make the blood thick and sluggish, increasing the risk of life-threatening conditions like blood clots. Himalayan populations, however, possess a unique version of the EPAS1 gene that prevents this dangerous overproduction of hemoglobin. This adaptation is a game-changer, allowing them to maintain normal blood flow and oxygen delivery even in low-oxygen environments. What's truly remarkable is that this genetic variant is not of entirely modern human origin. It was inherited through an ancient interbreeding event with Denisovans, a now-extinct hominin species. This discovery not only highlights the power of archaic genes but also sheds light on how modern humans have borrowed survival tools from their ancient relatives. Another key adaptation is linked to the EGLN1 gene, which is involved in sensing oxygen levels in the body. This gene has undergone significant natural selection in the Himalayan populations, optimizing their cellular response to hypoxia. By fine-tuning the body's reaction to low oxygen, this genetic trait helps prevent common high-altitude illnesses, such as chronic mountain sickness. But the genetic story doesn't stop there. Himalayan populations also show adaptations in genes associated with energy metabolism, allowing their bodies to extract and utilize energy more efficiently. For example, variations in the TBC1D1 gene have been linked to improved glucose and lipid metabolism, providing a steady energy supply in an environment where food can be scarce and temperatures demand high caloric output. These metabolic efficiencies not only support physical activity but also reduce the risk of cold stress. Interestingly, the adaptations don't just stop at oxygen and energy. Himalayan populations have also evolved genetic traits that enhance immune function and UV protection. Variants in genes like GNPAT and ZBTB20 may play a role in shielding cells from the harsh effects of ultraviolet radiation, which is more intense at higher altitudes. Combined, these adaptations create a biological toolkit that has allowed the Himalayan people to overcome challenges that would overwhelm most humans. So, how long did it take for these adaptations to develop? The evidence suggests that the EPAS1 variant first appeared in Denisovans over 40,000 years ago and entered the modern human gene pool through interbreeding. From there, natural selection took over, favoring individuals with these beneficial traits as they migrated into high-altitude regions. Over the past 10,000 years, these genetic adaptations have become deeply embedded in the Himalayan gene pool, providing a clear example of evolution in action. What's even more fascinating is that these adaptations are not limited to one group. While the Sherpa and Tibetans are the most studied, other Himalayan populations, such as the Layap and Kurtop in Bhutan, and the Thakali and Gael in Nepal, also carry similar genetic signatures. These populations have developed their own unique combinations of adaptations, shaped by local environmental pressures and historical migrations. But what can we learn from these extraordinary genetic traits? Scientists believe that understanding how the Himalayan people have adapted to high-altitude living could have real-world applications for medicine and health. For instance, insights into the EPAS1 and EGLN1 genes could help develop treatments for conditions like chronic hypoxia and altitude sickness, which affect millions of people worldwide. Ultimately, the genetic adaptations of the Himalayan people are more than just a survival mechanism. They are a testament to the power of evolution and the resilience of the human species. In the face of some of the harshest conditions on Earth, these populations have not only survived but thrived, paving the way for new discoveries in biology, medicine, and anthropology. And their story doesn't end here. In the next section, we'll explore how the cultural practices, trade, and interactions of the Himalayan people have intertwined with their genetic history to shape their identity today. The Himalayas, often referred to as the roof of the world, are not just a geographical marvel but also a genetic one. This towering mountain range has been home to a mosaic of human populations, each carrying unique genetic signatures shaped by millennia of migration, isolation, and adaptation. But what makes the genetic diversity of the Himalayan people so fascinating is how it mirrors their complex history, blending ancient lineages with the echoes of recent interactions. To understand this, let's start with a question. How did the first humans reach the Himalayas? Archaeological evidence suggests that humans first ventured into the Himalayan region around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. These early settlers were likely hunter-gatherers, part of ancient East Asian lineages. Over time, they laid the foundation for what would become the genetic structure of the Himalayan populations. Fast forward to around 10,000 years ago, a time of significant change. As agriculture spread across East Asia, populations began to grow and move, bringing new genetic lineages into the Himalayan region. One of the most influential migrations came from the Yellow River Basin in China, the cradle of early Sino-Tibetan culture. These migrants carried genetic markers linked to the Upper Yellow River Late Neolithic, upper_YR_LN, population, which would become a dominant ancestral source for many Himalayan groups. But migration wasn't a one-way street. The genetic record shows that populations in the Himalayas didn't just receive genetic influences, they also contributed their own. Gene flow from the Himalayas to lowland East and Central Asia has been detected in populations like the Nashi and Yi of China and the Burusho of Pakistan. This back-and-forth movement created a genetic tapestry unlike any other in the world. What makes the Himalayan genetic story even more intriguing is the strong population structure that emerged despite these migrations. Modern-day Himalayan groups, such as the Sherpa, Layap, and Mega, show surprisingly high levels of genetic differentiation. For example, pairwise FST values, measures of genetic distance, between some Himalayan populations exceed those typically seen between European and East Asian populations. Why is this the case? The answer lies in the unique combination of geographic isolation and cultural practices. The rugged terrain of the Himalayas created natural barriers that limited interaction between groups. At the same time, social factors like language, religion, and endogamy reinforced these divisions. For instance, populations like the Lokpu and Monpa in Bhutan show some of the highest levels of genetic isolation, with extensive runs of homozygosity, ROH, indicating ancient bottlenecks and small effective population sizes. Interestingly, not all Himalayan groups share the same levels of isolation. The Sherpa and Tibetans, for example, show evidence of more recent gene flow, both within the region and with lowland East Asian populations. This genetic connectivity is likely due to their involvement in trade and cultural exchange along the ancient Silk Road and other trade routes that crisscross the Himalayas. Another factor contributing to the region's genetic diversity is the dual-route migration model. While some populations, like the Sherpa, descended from groups that migrated directly from the Tibetan Plateau, the northern route, others, like the Tamong and Gurung, appear to have arrived via a southern arc along the foothills of the Himalayas. This southern route introduced genetic elements from both East and South Asia, creating a unique blend of ancestries. This brings us to another fascinating point: the presence of South Asian genetic contributions in certain Himalayan populations. For example, groups like the Chaitrai, Tharu, and Magar show significant admixture with Central and South Asian populations. This admixture likely occurred during the expansion of historical empires, such as the Gupta Empire of India, which exerted cultural and political influence over parts of Nepal and Bhutan. But the South Asian influence didn't stop at genetic contributions. It also left a mark on the uniparental lineages, the mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, and Y chromosome haplogroups. While many high-altitude populations, like the Sherpa, predominantly carry East Asian Y chromosome haplogroups like D1 and O2, lowland and mid-altitude groups show a higher prevalence of South Asian lineages like H1 and R1A. This pattern highlights the deep historical interactions between these regions. At the same time, the Himalayan genetic landscape is shaped by rare but fascinating outliers. For instance, the Toto, a lowland Himalayan group in India, carry a Denisovan introgressed region in the FAM178B gene, linked to hypoxia adaptation. This introgressed haplotype is shared with populations in Oceania, raising intriguing questions about ancient migration and interaction patterns. Another outlier is the Lokpu, whose genetic profile suggests an ancient divergence from other Himalayan groups. The Lokpu appear to have maintained a distinct lineage, with limited gene flow from their neighbors. This makes them a living window into the genetic diversity of early Himalayan settlers. Despite these differences, what unites the Himalayan populations is their resilience and ability to adapt to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The genetic diversity of these groups is not just a record of their past, it's also a testament to their survival. From the Denisovan-derived EPAS1 gene to the unique metabolic adaptations in TBC1D1, the Himalayas are a living laboratory of human evolution. So, what does the future hold for Himalayan genetic research? Scientists are now turning to advanced tools like ancient DNA analysis and whole genome sequencing to uncover even more layers of this genetic mosaic. By studying ancient genomes from archaeological sites across the region, researchers hope to reconstruct the full story of how the Himalayas became home to such a rich and diverse array of human populations. The genetic diversity of the Himalayan people is more than just a scientific curiosity. It's a reminder of the incredible complexity of human history and evolution. In the next section, we'll explore how cultural practices and trade networks have intertwined with these genetic histories, creating the vibrant and diverse communities we see in the Himalayas today. The Himalayan mountains, harsh, awe-inspiring, and unforgiving. For thousands of years, they've posed a formidable challenge to human habitation. Yet, the people who call these rugged peaks home have thrived, adapting to extreme conditions that most of us can barely imagine. From freezing temperatures to dangerously low oxygen levels, surviving at these altitudes is no small feat. But how exactly have Himalayan populations conquered this seemingly impossible environment? At the heart of their story lies one of the most remarkable examples of human evolution: genetic adaptation to high altitudes. Let's dive into the science behind how these adaptations work and the fascinating discoveries that have come to light. The most iconic adaptation in Himalayan populations is their ability to thrive in hypoxic, or low oxygen, conditions. At high altitudes, oxygen levels are about 40% lower than at sea level, which can cause altitude sickness and, over time, lead to severe health complications. Yet, populations like the Sherpa, Tibetans, and Layap not only survive but thrive in these conditions. The secret lies in their genes. The EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super athlete gene, is the star of this evolutionary story. What makes EPAS1 so special is its origin. It was inherited from an ancient hominin species, the Denisovans, who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Through a process called archaic introgression, the Denisovan variant of EPAS1 entered the gene pool of modern humans and became a game-changer for high-altitude survival. So, how does this gene work? EPAS1 regulates the production of hemoglobin, the protein in our red blood cells that carries oxygen. Most people living at sea level produce more hemoglobin when exposed to low oxygen, but too much of it can lead to thickened blood and increased risk of stroke or heart failure. The EPAS1 gene, however, allows Himalayan populations to maintain efficient oxygen transport without the harmful side effects. But EPAS1 isn't the only genetic adaptation at play. Another critical gene is EGLN1, which also helps regulate the body's response to low oxygen. Recent studies have shown that EGLN1 mutations found in Himalayan populations predate the EPAS1 adaptation, indicating that these high-altitude people have been evolving their unique physiology for thousands of years. What's even more fascinating is that these adaptations aren't limited to oxygen transport. Himalayan populations exhibit genetic changes in other systems that help them cope with the extreme environment. For example, metabolic adaptations. Genes like TBC1D1 and CLTCL1 influence energy utilization, allowing the body to efficiently use glucose and lipids, even in the cold and oxygen-scarce conditions of high altitudes. Immune system enhancements. Variants in genes like PAX5 and VTCN1 help fine-tune the immune system, offering protection against the heightened risks of infection and illness in the harsh Himalayan climate. Cardiac efficiency. Genes like SYNPO2L play a role in strengthening cardiac muscle function, which is vital for pumping blood effectively in low-oxygen environments. These genetic changes have helped Himalayan populations adapt in ways that go beyond basic survival. They've enabled them to excel. Take the Sherpa, for instance, whose unmatched endurance has made them legendary in the mountaineering world. Researchers have found that the Sherpa's mitochondrial DNA, particularly the M9 haplogroup, is another piece of this puzzle, enhancing energy production at the cellular level. But the story doesn't end with adaptation to altitude. Himalayan populations have also developed resistance to other environmental stresses, such as extreme cold. Genes linked to thermogenesis, the production of heat in the body, have been identified in high-altitude groups, pointing to an evolutionary response to sub-zero temperatures. Of course, these adaptations didn't happen overnight. Genetic evidence suggests that high-altitude populations began diverging from their lowland relatives around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Over millennia, natural selection acted on advantageous mutations, gradually shaping the unique genetic profiles of Himalayan peoples. Yet, there's another layer to this story: cultural and lifestyle adaptations that complement their genetic evolution. Himalayan diets, for example, are rich in carbohydrates, which provide a quick source of energy in cold and oxygen-poor environments. Traditional practices, such as controlled breathing techniques used in meditation, may also play a role in optimizing oxygen usage. But what about populations that don't live at extreme altitudes? Interestingly, even lowland Himalayan groups, like the Tharo, show traces of these adaptations. This suggests that genetic traits for altitude tolerance may have spread through historical gene flow, connecting high-altitude and lowland populations over time. And let's not forget the role of ancient migration in shaping these adaptations. The Denisovan EPAS1 gene, for instance, could only have reached the Himalayas through interbreeding between Denisovans and early humans tens of thousands of years ago. This interbreeding likely occurred somewhere in East Asia before the descendants of these ancient humans moved into the Himalayan region. But here's a question worth pondering. What does the future hold for these genetic adaptations? As climate change and modernization bring new challenges to the region, will these ancient adaptations still be relevant? Scientists are now studying how environmental and lifestyle changes might affect the genetic health of Himalayan populations, offering a glimpse into the ongoing evolution of these remarkable people. In many ways, the genetic adaptations of Himalayan populations are a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. They remind us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, life finds a way, not just to survive, but to thrive. In the next section, we'll explore how these genetic adaptations have influenced the rich cultural and linguistic diversity of the Himalayas, creating a tapestry of traditions that is as unique and enduring as the mountains themselves. The Himalayas have long been a natural barrier, standing tall between the sprawling plains of South Asia and the vast expanses of East Asia. Yet, they've also been a crossroads, a place where cultures, languages, and genes have intermingled over thousands of years. Behind the rugged peaks and deep valleys lies a fascinating story of migration and genetic mixing that shaped the people of the region. How did these populations get here? And what traces have they left behind in the genes of those who inhabit the Himalayas today? To answer these questions, we need to journey back in time, starting nearly 40,000 years ago. The first clues come from ancient fossils and DNA. Modern humans began spreading out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, eventually reaching South and East Asia. But they weren't alone. Fossils from the Tibetan Plateau, dating back 160,000 years, belong to a mysterious hominin species known as the Denisovans. While Denisovans disappeared long before modern humans arrived, their genetic legacy remains, especially in Himalayan populations. Through interbreeding, early modern humans inherited key Denisovan traits, such as the EPAS1 gene, which played a pivotal role in their survival at high altitudes. Fast forward to around 10,000 years ago. This is when we see the first signs of distinct population structures forming in the Himalayas. During this time, humans began to settle the region permanently, carving out a life in its challenging environment. Genetic evidence shows that Himalayan populations began diverging from their lowland relatives, such as the Han Chinese and South Asian groups, around this time. But the story doesn't end there. Over millennia, waves of migration brought new influences to the region. Archaeological and genetic evidence points to at least two major migration routes into the Himalayas. The first is what scientists call the Northern Route. This migration began in the northern fringes of the Tibetan Plateau, where ancient agricultural communities thrived in the fertile lands along the Yellow River. These farmers, who cultivated barley and millet, moved southward into the high-altitude valleys of the Himalayas around 5,000 years ago. They brought not only their crops but also their genetic markers, which can still be seen in populations like the Sherpa and Tibetans. The second migration route is known as the Southern Route. This involved groups moving along the southern slopes of the Himalayas, following river systems and trade routes. These migrants came from what is now northeastern India and Southeast Asia, bringing with them genetic traits linked to East Asian populations. Today, groups like the Tamang, Gurung, and Megar show clear genetic links to this southern migration. But migration wasn't just a one-way street. The Himalayas also acted as a hub, with genetic influences flowing in multiple directions. For example, Central Asian populations like the Burusha, who live near the Karakoram range, show evidence of Himalayan ancestry dating back over 1,500 years. This gene flow likely coincided with the rise of powerful regional empires, such as the Tibetan Empire and the Gupta Empire in India, which expanded trade and cultural exchanges. Interestingly, while Himalayan populations have absorbed genes from diverse sources, they've also managed to maintain their unique identity. This is due, in part, to the isolating effects of geography. The rugged terrain of the Himalayas created natural barriers that limited interaction between groups, preserving distinct genetic and cultural traits. For example, the Loppu, a small community in Bhutan, show one of the highest levels of genetic differentiation in the world, an indication of prolonged isolation. At the same time, some Himalayan groups were more connected to the outside world than others. The Tharu, who live in the lowlands of Nepal, show substantial genetic mixing with South Asian populations, reflecting centuries of migration and trade along the Indo-Gangetic plains. In contrast, high-altitude groups like the Layap and Sherpa show little to no genetic influence from lowland populations, highlighting the stark differences in connectivity across the region. One particularly fascinating aspect of Himalayan population history is the role of uniparental lineages, genetic markers passed down exclusively through either the maternal or paternal line. Y chromosome analysis reveals a dominance of East Asian haplogroups, such as D1 and O2, among high-altitude populations. These lineages are thought to have spread into the Himalayas during the agricultural expansion from the Tibetan Plateau. On the maternal side, mitochondrial DNA shows a mix of South and East Asian haplogroups, with certain lineages, like M9A, being particularly common among high-altitude groups. These findings suggest that while paternal genetic contributions were largely driven by northern migrations, maternal contributions reflect a more complex interplay of influences from both the north and south. But migration and genetic mixing weren't just shaped by geography. They were also influenced by history. The rise of trade routes, such as the Silk Road, brought new opportunities for interaction between Himalayan populations and their neighbors. Goods, ideas, and even genes flowed along these routes, connecting the region to Central Asia, South Asia, and beyond. One of the most striking examples of this genetic exchange is the presence of Himalayan ancestry in lowland populations like the Yi and Naxi of China. These groups, who live near the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau, show clear genetic links to Himalayan populations, likely due to centuries of migration and intermarriage. Yet, despite these connections, the Himalayas remain a region of extraordinary diversity. Today, The genetic makeup of Himalayan populations reflects a rich tapestry of migration, adaptation, and isolation. It's a story that spans thousands of years, weaving together influences from Denisovans, East Asians, Central Asians, and South Asians into a unique genetic legacy. As we continue to uncover the secrets of the Himalayas, one thing becomes clear. This is not just a story of survival. It's a story of connection, of how humans, against all odds, found ways to thrive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth while staying deeply interconnected with the world around them. In the next section, we'll explore how these migratory patterns have influenced the region's linguistic and cultural diversity, highlighting the ways in which history, genetics, and identity intertwine. The Himalayan region, with its harsh high-altitude environment, has been a crucible of human adaptation for thousands of years. Life at elevations above 3,000 meters poses immense challenges. Low oxygen levels, extreme cold, and limited resources create a survival landscape that is anything but forgiving. Yet, the people of the Himalayas have not only survived but thrived, all thanks to the extraordinary power of natural selection. At the heart of this story lies genetic adaptation, which has shaped the physiology of Himalayan populations in remarkable ways. Perhaps the most famous of these adaptations is found in the EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super-athlete gene. This gene helps regulate the body's response to hypoxia, or low oxygen levels, which are a constant challenge at high altitudes. But the real twist: this adaptation didn't evolve entirely within modern humans. Instead, it came from an ancient cousin species, the Denisovans. Through interbreeding tens of thousands of years ago, modern humans inherited a Denisovan-derived version of EPAS1, which gave them a crucial survival advantage. Studies show that this gene is found in nearly 80% of Tibetans and Sherpa, making it one of the strongest examples of beneficial archaic introgression in human evolution. While EPAS1 grabs most of the attention, it's far from the only genetic adaptation that helps Himalayan populations thrive. Another key player is EGLN1, a gene that works alongside EPAS1 to fine-tune the body's response to hypoxia. Research shows that variations in EGLN1 are nearly universal among high-altitude populations like the Tibetans and Sherpa. These adaptations ensure that oxygen delivery to tissues remains efficient, even in the thin air of the Himalayas. What's fascinating is that these genetic changes didn't appear overnight. Scientists estimate that selection on these high-altitude genes began around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, just as humans were beginning to permanently settle the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas. It's a timeline that aligns closely with the Neolithic expansion and the rise of agriculture in the region. But adaptation to high altitudes goes beyond just oxygen regulation. Himalayan populations also show signs of genetic changes related to metabolism, immunity, and physical endurance, all of which contribute to their ability to survive in this challenging environment. For example, variants in genes like TBC1D1 and CLTCL1 are thought to improve energy efficiency and glucose utilization, allowing individuals to maintain high levels of physical activity in cold, resource-scarce conditions. Immunity also plays a crucial role. Studies of Himalayan genomes have uncovered signals of selection in genes related to immune function, such as PAX5 and VTCN1, which regulate T-cell responses. These adaptations are likely tied to the region's unique disease landscape, where harsh climates and isolated living conditions create distinct challenges for immune defense. Another fascinating aspect of Himalayan adaptation is how these genetic changes vary across different populations within the region. For instance, while high-altitude groups like the Sherpa and Layap show near-universal adaptation to hypoxia, mid-altitude populations, such as the Tamong and Gurung, exhibit a mix of high-altitude traits and lowland genetic markers. This gradient reflects centuries of migration, intermarriage, and genetic mixing, which have shaped the region's genetic diversity. But what about lowland populations? Interestingly, the genetic legacy of Himalayan adaptations isn't confined to the mountains. Groups like the Yi and Naxi in southwestern China, as well as the Burusho in Central Asia, carry small but significant traces of Himalayan genetic signatures. This gene flow likely occurred through ancient trade and migration routes that connected the Himalayas to surrounding regions. One of the most compelling discoveries in recent research is the identification of novel selection signals in Himalayan populations, genes that haven't been studied extensively before. For example, The DISC1 gene, which is involved in brain function and hypoxia response, shows strong evidence of selection in high-altitude groups. Other genes, like CETP, which influences cholesterol metabolism, and ASPHD2, which affects oxygen-binding activity, highlight the complex interplay between genetics and the environment. But how do we know these changes are due to selection? Scientists use tools like genome-wide selection scans to identify regions of the genome that show unusually high levels of differentiation between high-altitude and lowland populations. These scans reveal hotspots of adaptation, genetic regions where natural selection has acted most strongly. Interestingly, not all adaptations in Himalayan populations are tied to their harsh environment. Some may reflect broader patterns of human evolution. For example, variants in M9A, a mitochondrial DNA haplogroup common in high-altitude populations, have been linked to cold tolerance and energy efficiency. However, these traits may have evolved earlier in East Asia before being passed on to Himalayan groups. The story of Himalayan adaptation also highlights the importance of population size and genetic drift. High-altitude groups often have smaller population sizes, which amplifies the effects of both selection and genetic drift. This is especially true for isolated populations like the Lopbu in Bhutan, who show some of the highest levels of genetic differentiation in the world. But adaptation is an ongoing process. As the modern world encroaches on the Himalayas, bringing new lifestyles, diets, and even climates, these populations face new challenges. How will their genetic legacy evolve in the face of these changes? While we may not have all the answers yet, one thing is certain. The people of the Himalayas are living proof of humanity's extraordinary ability to adapt. Their genes tell a story of resilience, innovation, and survival against all odds, a story that continues to unfold with each new discovery. In the next section, we'll explore how these genetic adaptations influence not just survival, but also the daily lives and cultural practices of Himalayan populations, bridging the gap between science and human experience. The story of the Himalayan people is nothing short of extraordinary. From their genetic roots to their incredible adaptations, these high-altitude populations offer a unique glimpse into the intricate interplay between human biology, environment, and culture. Over tens of thousands of years, the people of the Himalayas have evolved to not just survive, but thrive in one of the planet's most extreme environments. Their remarkable journey began with the movement of ancestral East Asian populations into the region. But it wasn't just migration that shaped their destiny. It was their environment. The thin air and freezing temperatures of the Himalayas demanded something more. And so, through natural selection, their genomes were sculpted by the harsh realities of high-altitude living. One of the most fascinating discoveries in this field is how ancient DNA reveals the story of their adaptation. The Denisovan legacy, most famously represented by the EPAS1 gene, is just one piece of the puzzle. Other genes, like EGLN1, DISC1, and even mitochondrial DNA variants, contribute to an intricate biological toolkit that allows Himalayan people to endure low oxygen levels, regulate their metabolism, and resist the unique disease challenges of the region. Together, these adaptations paint a vivid picture of evolutionary resilience. But the genetic narrative doesn't end there. Migration and cultural exchange have played equally significant roles in shaping the diversity of Himalayan populations. Over millennia, trade routes, wars, and conquests brought outsiders to the region, leading to moments of genetic mixing and the diffusion of ideas. From the southern slopes of Nepal to the eastern reaches of Bhutan, this interplay of ancient and modern influences has created the rich tapestry of Himalayan identity. Cultural practices, too, reflect the close relationship between the people and their environment. From agricultural techniques tailored to high-altitude terrains to religious practices that honor the mountains as sacred, the Himalayan way of life is deeply intertwined with its geography. These cultural traits aren't just traditions, they are survival strategies, passed down through generations and refined over thousands of years. Today, the Himalayas remain a living laboratory for scientists seeking to understand human adaptation and resilience. With advances in ancient DNA analysis, researchers are uncovering not just the genetic blueprints of high-altitude populations, but also the deep connections they share with other groups across the globe. The genetic markers found in Himalayan groups extend into neighboring populations like the Yi, Nashi, and even the Burusha, highlighting the region's pivotal role in human migration and evolution. Yet, as awe-inspiring as these genetic adaptations are, they also serve as a stark reminder of the challenges these communities face in the modern world. Climate change, urbanization, and cultural shifts threaten to upend the delicate balance that has sustained Himalayan populations for thousands of years. As the glacier melt and ecosystems shift, the very environment that shaped their genetic legacy is being transformed. Despite these challenges, the resilience of the Himalayan people remains undeniable. Their story is a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, innovate, and persevere. From the ancient Denisovan genes that gave them a survival edge to the cultural practices that continue to define their identities, the Himalayan people remind us of the incredible ways in which humans have shaped, and been shaped by, the world around them. As we look to the future, the lessons of the Himalayas hold relevance for us all. In a rapidly changing world, where adaptation is more crucial than ever, the genetic secrets of the Himalayan people stand as a source of inspiration and insight. Their story is not just about survival, it's about thriving in the face of adversity, a legacy of endurance that echoes across generations and altitudes. What if I told you that two Mexicans, living just hundreds of miles apart, could be as genetically different as a European is from an East Asian? It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But the hidden story behind Mexican DNA is far richer and more surprising than most of us imagine. This isn't just about ancestry, it's about ancient civilizations, conquests, migrations, and the unshakable threads that connect the past to the present. For centuries, we've seen Mexicans as a unified group, many calling themselves mestizo, a mix of indigenous and European heritage. But science tells a different tale. DNA reveals a history shaped by incredible diversity, spanning thousands of years, and it's not just locked in history books or ancient artifacts. It's written in the genes of millions of people today. So, how did this hidden story unfold? How did the Aztecs, Mayans, Spanish conquistadors, African slaves, and even modern migrations contribute to Mexico's rich genetic tapestry? And why does it matter? Not just for understanding history, but for shaping healthcare, identity, and our connection to the world today. In this video, we'll uncover the fascinating secrets of Mexican DNA, exploring ancient roots, the impact of colonialism, and how the genes of millions carry the echoes of ancient empires. By the end, you'll see that Mexican DNA doesn't just tell one story, it tells 1,000. Mexico is a land of extraordinary history, and its genetic diversity is rooted in ancient civilizations that thrived long before the Spanish arrived. Thousands of years ago, the Olmecs, the Maya, the Zapotecs, and the Aztecs rose to power, building monumental cities, creating complex systems of trade, and cultivating a cultural richness that still echoes through modern Mexico. But what many don't realize is how these civilizations also shaped the genetic blueprint of their descendants. You see, Mexico's geography played a huge role in preserving this diversity. Vast mountain ranges, dense rainforests, and expansive deserts isolated many indigenous groups, allowing them to develop unique genetic traits over thousands of years. Scientists have identified 3 major genetic clusters across the country, each one tied to specific indigenous populations and their ancient homelands. For example, the Seri people of northern Mexico, living along the Gulf of California, remain one of the most genetically distinct groups in the country. In the south, near the Guatemalan border, the Lacandan Maya preserve DNA that's deeply tied to the ancient civilizations that ruled the region for over 4,000 years. And in central Mexico, near the Valley of Mexico, populations reflect the genetic influence of the Aztec Empire, which was one of the largest and most powerful civilizations in the Americas. Here's the astonishing part. The genetic differences between these indigenous groups are as dramatic as those between Europeans and East Asians. That's because they remained isolated from one another for thousands of years, developing distinct genetic profiles that persist even today. So, why does this matter? Well, it reminds us that Mexican DNA isn't just a blend of indigenous and European ancestry. It's a patchwork of diverse stories from civilizations that thrived long before Columbus set foot in the Americas. And this genetic diversity isn't just history. It's a vital part of modern identity, culture, and even health. The arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century marked a turning point in Mexico's genetic history. When Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors landed, they brought more than weapons and horses. They brought a seismic shift in the population's genetic makeup. But the story of this conquest isn't as straightforward as it seems. The Spanish colonization introduced a phenomenon known as directional mating. Most of the Spanish settlers who arrived were men, and they formed relationships, often unequal, with indigenous women. This left a profound mark on the genetic landscape of Mexico. Today, the paternal DNA, or Y chromosome, in Mexicans is predominantly European, particularly in the north and west of the country. But the maternal DNA, inherited through the mitochondria, tells a very different story. Nearly 90% of Mexicans have indigenous maternal ancestry, reflecting the deep roots of Native American women in shaping the population. And then there's the lesser-known story of African slaves. During the colonial period, thousands of Africans were brought to Mexico to work in mines and on plantations. While their genetic contribution is smaller, ranging from 1% to 5%, it's still significant, especially in regions like the Gulf Coast. This legacy adds another layer of complexity to Mexico's genetic story. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite 500 years of mixing between indigenous, European, and African populations, the genetic remnants of ancient indigenous groups remain surprisingly intact. For example, researchers have found clear traces of Aztec, Mayan, and other pre-Columbian civilizations in the DNA of modern Mexicans, even in cosmopolitan areas where European and African ancestry are also present. What does this tell us? The conquest may have reshaped Mexico's population, but it couldn't erase the deep imprint of indigenous ancestry. In fact, it's this blending of histories, indigenous, European, and African, that makes Mexican DNA so unique. It's a genetic reflection of resilience, adaptation, and the survival of ancient cultures. When you think of Mexico, you might picture a single nation with a shared culture. But beneath that national identity lies a hidden mosaic of regional genetic diversity. From the deserts of Sonora to the lush rainforests of Chiapas, Mexico's DNA reflects its geography and its history. In northern Mexico, where the dry deserts stretch across vast distances, European ancestry is most dominant. This region was a hub for Spanish settlement during the colonial period, which is why paternal European DNA is strongest here. Indigenous ancestry, while still present, takes a backseat to the legacy of Spanish conquistadors. But as you move south toward the center of the country, the genetic story changes. Here, indigenous ancestry becomes more prominent. Central Mexico was home to the Aztec Empire, one of the most advanced civilizations of its time. The Valley of Mexico, where Mexico City now stands, served as a cultural and political center for centuries. The DNA of people from this region is a true mix, balancing indigenous and European heritage, with remnants of ancient empires still visible today. And then there's southern Mexico, particularly the Yucatan Peninsula. This region has the highest concentration of indigenous ancestry in the country, especially among Mayan communities. The Maya lived in relative isolation for thousands of years, protected by mountains, rainforests, and their own cultural dominance. Even today, their genetic makeup remains one of the most distinct in Mexico. What's even more fascinating is how these regional differences affect modern health. Researchers have discovered that lung capacity, for example, varies between Mexicans from the West and those from the Yucatan. This isn't just a random difference. It's tied to genetic traits inherited from indigenous ancestors. Imagine two people, the same age and health, taking a lung test. A person from the West could appear up to 10 years younger in terms of lung function compared to someone from the Yucatan. These findings highlight a simple truth. Mexican DNA isn't a single story. It's a collection of regional narratives, each shaped by geography, history, and culture. From the Seri people in the north to the Lacandan Maya in the south, the diversity within Mexico is extraordinary. And here's the incredible part. Even in today's cosmopolitan cities, where populations are highly mixed, the DNA of ancient indigenous groups still maps onto specific regions. It's like a genetic fingerprint of Mexico's history, hiding in plain sight. For generations, the term mestizo has been used to describe the majority of Mexicans, a term that means a mix of indigenous and European ancestry. But here's the thing. This label oversimplifies the rich complexity of Mexican identity. Mestizo suggests a homogeneous blending of cultures, but DNA tells us a different story. Every Mexican has a unique genetic signature, shaped by centuries of migration, conquest, and adaptation. Two individuals who both identify as mestizo could have completely different genetic profiles. One might carry a majority of indigenous ancestry, while another might have stronger European or African influences. Take maternal ancestry, for example. Nearly 90% of Mexican women trace their mitochondrial DNA to indigenous American haplogroups. These genetic markers have been passed down, generation after generation, from mothers to children. But if you look at paternal DNA, or Y chromosomes, European ancestry dominates. This reflects a history where Spanish men fathered children with indigenous women during the colonial era, a history of power imbalance that still shapes how identity is defined today. What's more, the diversity of indigenous groups adds even more layers to this narrative. Mexico is home to dozens of indigenous languages and cultures, from the Nahua in central Mexico to the Zapotec in Oaxaca and the Maya in the south. Each group has its own traditions, histories, and genetic traits, but they are often lumped together under the broad term indigenous. DNA testing is now challenging these old narratives. Modern tools like Ancestry DNA and other platforms allow people to trace their roots with incredible precision. You can uncover connections to specific regions or even specific indigenous communities, like the Mixtec, Huichol, or Tarahumara. For many, these discoveries are deeply personal, offering a chance to reclaim a part of their heritage that might have been lost to history. But it's not just about ancestry, it's about identity. Mexico's genetic story shows us that being mestizo isn't a single story. It's a mosaic, where each individual carries their own unique blend of history and culture. And as science uncovers more about Mexican DNA, it's helping people reconnect with their roots in ways that go far beyond the simple labels of the past. In the end, Mexican DNA isn't just about where you come from. It's about understanding who you are today. Mexican DNA doesn't just tell a story of history and identity. It holds the potential to revolutionize medicine. The incredible genetic diversity in Mexico impacts how diseases are diagnosed, treated, and even understood. But this diversity also highlights a problem. Many global medical studies have overlooked populations like Mexicans, leading to gaps in precision medicine. For instance, let's talk about lung health. Scientists discovered a striking difference in lung capacity across populations in Mexico. Someone from the western regions with indigenous ancestry might show a baseline lung function far superior to someone from the Yucatan Peninsula. These differences, tied to genetic variation, could lead to misdiagnosis if doctors rely on generalized health metrics rather than region-specific data. Another area where Mexican genetics plays a role is type 2 diabetes. Certain genetic variants associated with this condition are more prevalent in indigenous populations, yet treatments don't always account for these unique traits. Without studying these variations, we risk developing therapies that aren't effective for significant portions of the population. Asthma is another prime example. Research has shown that ancestry-specific genetic markers affect how individuals respond to asthma medications. Scientists found that Mexicans with indigenous ancestry respond differently to certain treatments compared to those with higher European ancestry. By understanding these nuances, doctors can move toward precision medicine, tailoring treatments to each person's unique genetic makeup. But the gaps in research are glaring. Did you know that most genetic studies focus overwhelmingly on populations of European descent? Less than 5% of participants in global genomic studies represent people of Latin American ancestry, despite their immense genetic diversity. This means that many medical advancements, from drug trials to disease predictions, are based on data that may not apply to Mexicans or other underrepresented groups. Efforts like the Mexico Biobank are starting to change that. By analyzing genetic samples from thousands of people across Mexico, researchers are uncovering new insights into how diseases affect different populations. This isn't just important for Mexicans in Mexico. It's crucial for the millions of Mexican Americans and others of Mexican descent around the world. Their health outcomes can also benefit from the inclusion of diverse populations in medical research. At its core, this diversity in Mexican DNA reminds us that medicine isn't one size fits all. The more we understand the genetic stories of different populations, the closer we get to a future where healthcare is truly personalized. Mexican DNA isn't just a window into the past, it's a key to unlocking better, more equitable medicine for the future. The story of Mexican DNA doesn't just matter for Mexico. It holds lessons for the entire world. At its core, The genetic diversity of Mexico is a reflection of humanity's shared journey, migration, adaptation, and the resilience of culture. Let's start at the beginning. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia into the Americas. Over time, they spread across the continents, adapting to different climates and ecosystems. In Mexico, the unique geography created isolated indigenous populations, each with its own genetic profile. These genetic fingerprints preserve ancient stories about how humans evolved and survived. But this isn't just a story about the distant past. The genetic diversity in Mexico has global implications for understanding health, ancestry, and identity. Take migration, for example. Millions of people of Mexican descent now live in the United States and other countries. Their genetic makeup reflects not only Mexico's diversity but also the broader story of indigenous, European, and African ancestry that shaped the Americas. And then there's medicine. By studying Mexican genetics, researchers can gain insights that apply to other populations worldwide. For example, some genetic markers linked to type 2 diabetes and heart disease in indigenous Mexicans are also found in other Native American and even Asian populations. Understanding these markers could improve healthcare outcomes not just in Mexico but around the globe. But Mexican DNA also challenges us to think about identity in new ways. It shows us that labels like Latino or Hispanic are oversimplified. These terms might group people together for convenience, but they fail to capture the incredible diversity that exists within these communities. Someone from northern Mexico could have a genetic makeup completely different from someone in the Yucatan, and yet, both are part of the same nation. What's remarkable is how Mexican DNA connects us all. It reminds us that migration and mixing aren't new. They've been happening for thousands of years. And while we may focus on the differences between populations, the truth is that our genes reveal just how interconnected we really are. This is why studying Mexican DNA matters. It's not just about understanding one country's history. It's about uncovering the story of human adaptation and survival. It's about learning how our differences make us unique and how our shared genetics connect us as one human family. So, what does Mexican DNA really tell us? It's more than just a genetic code. It's a story of ancient civilizations that thrived long before the Spanish set foot on these lands. A story of resilience, as indigenous peoples carried their ancestry forward through centuries of upheaval and change. And a story of adaptation, as Mexico's genetic tapestry evolved to include European, African, and even Asian threads. But it's also a deeply personal story. For every individual, their DNA isn't just a map of where they come from. It's a key to understanding who they are. Whether it's discovering a connection to the Mayan people, tracing roots to an ancestral town in Michoacan, or learning about a distant relative across the border, Mexican DNA reminds us of the richness of identity. This diversity isn't just fascinating, it matters. It shapes how we understand history, how we approach medicine, and how we view ourselves as part of the human family. Mexican DNA teaches us that differences aren't divisions, they are opportunities to learn more about the shared journey we've all taken as humans. So, as you think about your own ancestry, your own roots, remember that the story of Mexican DNA is a reminder of how complex, beautiful, and interconnected our world truly is. If this story inspired you, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What surprised you the most? What part of your own story are you curious to explore? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the fascinating stories hidden in our genes. Because at the end of the day, our DNA doesn't just tell us where we come from, it shows us how we're all connected. Polynesians are known as some of the greatest navigators in human history. Thousands of years ago, their ancestors set sail across the vast Pacific Ocean, conquering one of the most challenging environments on Earth. But they carried something even more remarkable than their navigation skills, their DNA. A genetic legacy shaped by migration, isolation, and unexpected encounters. What makes Polynesian DNA so unique? Why does it stand apart from other populations in the world? And what hidden secrets does it reveal about one of the greatest human migrations in history? To understand why Polynesian DNA is so distinct, we have to go back nearly 3,000 years. In Southeast Asia, a group of people known as Austronesians developed advanced seafaring technology. With their canoes and celestial navigation skills, they started an incredible journey, one that would take them across thousands of miles of open ocean. They first reached the Philippines, then moved into the islands of Melanesia. But here's where something remarkable happened. Instead of simply continuing eastward, they stayed in Melanesia long enough to mix with local populations, absorbing a new genetic signature before continuing their journey. As these explorers moved further into the Pacific, they encountered one of the biggest challenges in human history: complete isolation. Each new island they settled was hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles away from the next. Every time a small group of settlers arrived, they carried only a fraction of their original genetic diversity. This phenomenon, known as the founder effect, meant that Polynesians developed a unique genetic profile, different from their ancestors in both Asia and Melanesia. Over time, their DNA became more and more distinct, shaped by survival in some of the most remote environments on Earth. But there's something even more fascinating. When scientists analyzed Polynesian genetics, they found an unusual pattern. While their mitochondrial DNA, the DNA passed down from mothers, was overwhelmingly Asian, their Y chromosomes, inherited from fathers, showed a strong Melanesian influence. What does this mean? It suggests that early Polynesian societies were matrilocal, meaning that women stayed in their home communities while men moved between islands. As a result, Polynesians today carry the genetic legacy of both their Asian ancestors and the Melanesians they encountered along the way. For decades, researchers debated whether Polynesians ever reached the Americas. Some believed it was impossible, that their voyages stopped at Easter Island. But a groundbreaking DNA study revealed something shocking. Polynesians and native South Americans share small but significant genetic markers. The evidence points to contact around 800 years ago, meaning Polynesians may have sailed all the way to South America, picked up local inhabitants, and brought them back across the Pacific. This discovery changes everything. It means that Polynesians didn't just explore the Pacific. They may have bridged two continents with their voyages. Another key to understanding Polynesian ancestry lies in a specific genetic marker called the Polynesian motif. This unique mitochondrial DNA sequence is found in almost all Polynesians today and helps trace their maternal lineage back to Taiwan and the Philippines. But despite this strong Asian link, Polynesians developed their own distinct genetic identity over thousands of years. They are one of the most genetically homogeneous populations in the world, yet their history is anything but simple. Polynesian DNA isn't just a record of the past, it holds clues about the present and even the future. Researchers have discovered that Polynesians have some of the highest rates of type 2 diabetes in the world. Some scientists believe this may be due to a thrifty gene that helped their ancestors store energy efficiently during long voyages. But in today's modern world, with changes in diet and lifestyle, this same genetic trait may now contribute to health issues. The Polynesians' genetic journey is a testament to their resilience, innovation, and adaptability. Their DNA tells the story of one of the greatest migrations in human history, a journey that took them across thousands of miles of open ocean, into complete isolation, and possibly even to the shores of South America. And with new discoveries still emerging, we may only be scratching the surface of what Polynesian genetics can reveal. Polynesian DNA is like a time capsule, holding the genetic footprints of a journey unlike any other. Each island they settled became a living laboratory of evolution, where genetic diversity shrank, adaptations formed, and unique traits emerged. But there's still more to uncover. What made their survival possible in some of the most isolated places on Earth? And how did their DNA shape not only their past but their future? One of the most striking genetic phenomena in Polynesians is their extremely low genetic diversity. Imagine this: every time a small group of people left one island to settle another, they carried only a fraction of the genetic material from their ancestors. Over generations, as populations remained isolated, their gene pool became more and more limited. This process, called genetic drift, explains why Polynesians share such a high degree of similarity. In fact, scientists have found that Polynesians today are among the least genetically diverse populations in the world. But despite this, they thrived. Their ability to adapt, to master their environment, and to develop sustainable ways of living on remote islands ensured their survival. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Polynesian genetics is their connection to Melanesians. For decades, researchers believed that Polynesians descended primarily from Austronesians, the seafaring people who originated in Taiwan and moved southward. But when geneticists examined Polynesian Y chromosomes, they found something unexpected. Over 65% of Polynesian paternal DNA comes from Melanesians. This raises an intriguing question. How did this mixing happen? The answer may lie in the cultural structure of early Polynesian societies. Many anthropologists believe that Polynesians followed a matrilocal system, where men moved between islands while women stayed in their home communities. This would explain why Polynesian mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed down from mothers, remains overwhelmingly Asian, while their Y chromosomes, inherited from fathers, show strong Melanesian influence. But perhaps the most astonishing revelation in recent years is the potential connection between Polynesians and South Americans. Theories about contact between these two civilizations have existed for centuries. Some pointed to the presence of sweet potatoes, a crop native to South America, in Polynesia as evidence of ancient interaction. Others speculated that the massive stone heads of Easter Island resembled statues found in the Andes. But it wasn't until scientists analyzed Polynesian and Native American DNA that they found irrefutable proof, small but significant genetic markers indicating interbreeding around 800 years ago. This means that Polynesians either reached South America, mingled with the local population, and brought them back across the Pacific, or, even more remarkably, that South Americans made their way into the Pacific on their own. Either way, the discovery challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient transoceanic travel. Another critical aspect of Polynesian genetics is the so-called Polynesian motif, a unique mitochondrial DNA sequence found in nearly all Polynesians. This genetic marker is a direct link to their Austronesian ancestors and provides insight into their migratory path. But even though their maternal lineage traces back to Southeast Asia, Polynesians evolved into a distinct genetic group, separated from their origins by thousands of miles and centuries of isolation. Polynesians aren't just genetically unique, they are also biologically adapted to their environment. One example is their remarkable endurance and athletic ability, which some researchers believe may be linked to their ancestors' history of long-distance voyaging. Their bodies were built for survival, storing energy efficiently for times of scarcity. However, this same adaptation may have unintended consequences today. Polynesians have some of the highest rates of type 2 diabetes and obesity in the world, a problem that scientists suspect is linked to the thrifty gene hypothesis. This theory suggests that Polynesians developed a genetic predisposition to store fat and energy in order to survive long voyages and food shortages. But in today's world, with access to modern diets and lifestyles, this once beneficial adaptation may now contribute to serious health issues. Despite their genetic uniqueness, Polynesians have maintained strong cultural traditions that connect them to their ancestors. Their stories, navigation techniques, and even their physical endurance are echoes of the people who set sail across the Pacific thousands of years ago. And with each new genetic discovery, we're learning more about their incredible journey, one that reshaped the world and defied the limits of human exploration. Polynesian DNA isn't just about the past. It holds the key to understanding how humans adapt, evolve, and survive against all odds. And with science continuing to unlock its secrets, one thing is clear. The story of the Polynesians is far from over. The Polynesian genetic journey is not just a story of survival. It's a testament to human ingenuity and exploration. Their DNA carries the legacy of their ancestors, who defied the limits of their time, sailing into the unknown and shaping civilizations on islands separated by thousands of miles. But their genetic uniqueness also raises new questions. How did they sustain their populations despite their low genetic diversity? What does their DNA reveal about their adaptability? And could it provide insights into modern health challenges faced by Polynesian communities today? One of the most fascinating aspects of Polynesian genetics is how their ancestors managed to thrive despite the effects of the founder effect and genetic drift. Typically, populations with low genetic diversity are more vulnerable to disease and environmental changes. However, Polynesians developed strategies to counteract this risk. Their societies placed a strong emphasis on community cooperation and resource management, ensuring that even in times of hardship, survival was possible. Their ability to build complex social structures and pass down knowledge of agriculture, fishing, and navigation played a critical role in maintaining healthy populations across their vast oceanic territory. Even with their genetic isolation, Polynesians remained physically and culturally resilient. Studies have shown that many Polynesians share genetic markers linked to muscular endurance and strength, traits that may have been essential for their survival. These adaptations may have played a role in their ability to handle extreme physical exertion, whether paddling for weeks at sea, farming volcanic soils, or constructing massive stone monuments like the Moai of Easter Island. Interestingly, modern research suggests that Polynesians have a genetic advantage in muscle development, which could explain their strong presence in sports like rugby and weightlifting today. But while their genes help them endure the harsh conditions of island life, they also present challenges in the modern world. Polynesians have some of the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases, far higher than many other populations. Scientists believe this is due to an evolutionary adaptation that once helped them survive but now works against them. The thrifty gene hypothesis suggests that Polynesians evolved to store fat efficiently, an advantage during long ocean voyages where food was scarce. This genetic trait allowed their ancestors to survive unpredictable food shortages. However, in today's world, where processed foods and modern diets have replaced traditional island diets, this adaptation has led to widespread metabolic disorders. The unique Polynesian genetic blueprint may hold valuable information for medical research. Scientists are now studying Polynesian DNA to understand how genetics influence metabolism, muscle growth, and disease resistance. These studies could lead to breakthroughs in understanding obesity-related illnesses, helping not only Polynesian communities but also populations around the world that struggle with similar health issues. Another exciting area of research is how Polynesian genetics might help scientists understand human migration and adaptation. Their genetic markers serve as a living record of how humans adapted to extreme isolation and how small populations can survive and thrive in new environments. This research doesn't just apply to history. It could have implications for the future of humanity, especially as scientists explore the possibilities of long-term space travel and colonization of other planets. Polynesian DNA also plays a crucial role in unraveling mysteries of ancient transoceanic contact. While the discovery of South American DNA in Polynesians was groundbreaking, it also raises further questions. Were Polynesians the only ones who traveled to the Americas, or did native South Americans also set sail into the Pacific? Could there be more undiscovered genetic links between these ancient seafaring civilizations? As scientists continue to decode the Polynesian genome, they are piecing together one of the greatest human migration stories ever told. Every new discovery adds another layer to our understanding of how Polynesians shaped, and were shaped by, their incredible journey across the Pacific. Their DNA tells us that they were not just explorers, they were pioneers, innovators, and survivors who left an indelible mark on the history of humankind. Even today, Polynesian communities take pride in their ancestral strength. The revival of traditional wayfinding, navigating by the stars, winds, and ocean currents, has become a powerful symbol of cultural resilience. Polynesians are once again sailing the Pacific using ancient techniques, proving that the spirit of exploration encoded in their DNA is very much alive. The story of Polynesian DNA is far from over. With advancing technology, researchers are uncovering more secrets hidden in their genes, secrets that could reshape our understanding of human evolution, genetics, and the limits of exploration. What other mysteries lie waiting in the genetic code of the world's greatest voyages? Only time and science will tell. As we delve deeper into the mysteries of Polynesian DNA, we find that it doesn't just tell the story of the past, it also connects to the cultural and spiritual life of Polynesian people today. For them, genealogy isn't just a scientific concept, it's a foundational part of their identity, linked to their ancestors, traditions, and the sacred lands and waters they inhabit. Their DNA carries not only the marks of ancient migrations but also a profound spiritual connection that continues to shape their communities. One of the most remarkable cultural practices that intertwines with genetic legacy is Wakapapa, a Maori term that refers to genealogy and ancestral connections. In many Polynesian cultures, reciting Wakapapa is a way of honoring one's ancestors, tracing lineage back through generations to the original voyagers who crossed the Pacific. This oral tradition serves as a living testament to their historical journey and mirrors the genetic heritage carried within their DNA. The knowledge of who they are and where they come from isn't just written in their genes. It's passed down through stories, chants, and songs that have survived for centuries. The spiritual significance of genealogy is also seen in the way Polynesians relate to their environment. In their worldview, everything is interconnected: people, land, sea, and sky. This interconnectedness is reflected in the way they navigate their world, both physically and spiritually. Ancient Polynesian navigators used the stars, ocean currents, and even the behavior of birds to find their way across the vast Pacific. These skills, passed down through generations, are echoed in their genetic adaptability, which enabled them to thrive on isolated islands. Today, the revival of traditional navigation, or wayfinding, is seen as a reclaiming of cultural heritage, a way of honoring their ancestors' extraordinary voyages, and a reaffirmation of their place in the world. But Polynesian DNA does more than connect them to the past. It also influences their future. In health, education, and cultural preservation, understanding their genetic makeup helps Polynesians address contemporary challenges. For instance, the high prevalence of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease among Polynesian populations has spurred community-led health initiatives. By combining genetic research with traditional knowledge, these programs aim to promote healthier lifestyles and preserve indigenous wisdom. Efforts like the Pacifica Medical Association work to empower Polynesian communities with culturally appropriate healthcare, recognizing that solutions must come from within the community to be effective. On the scientific front, Polynesian DNA continues to be a valuable resource for geneticists and anthropologists alike. New technologies, such as CRISPR and genome sequencing, are unlocking deeper insights into the genetic adaptations that allowed Polynesians to survive and thrive in the Pacific. Researchers are studying how specific genetic markers relate to traits like endurance, resistance to certain diseases, and even psychological resilience. This knowledge doesn't just add to the scientific community. It empowers Polynesians to take control of their genetic legacy, using it to strengthen their communities and cultural practices. There is also a growing movement within Polynesian communities to protect their genetic data and ensure it is used ethically. The history of scientific research in indigenous populations has not always been respectful, and there is a concerted effort to ensure that Polynesian DNA is not exploited. Cultural advocacy groups work to educate their communities about genetic research and emphasize the importance of consent and control over their genetic information. This movement is about more than just protecting genetic data. It's about reclaiming ownership over their own narratives and ensuring that their story is told with dignity and respect. As we look to the future, the lessons of Polynesian genetics may offer valuable insights for humanity as a whole. In a world facing climate change, resource scarcity, and health crises, the Polynesian legacy of adaptation and resilience offers a model for sustainable living. Their ability to create thriving societies in isolated environments can inspire new approaches to community building, resource management, and cultural preservation in the modern age. The unique genetic heritage of Polynesians is a story of survival, adaptation, and unyielding spirit. It is a reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, human innovation and resilience can flourish. The secrets of Polynesian DNA continue to unfold, shedding light on not only their incredible past but also the enduring strength that defines them today. Whether through scientific discovery, cultural revival, or community empowerment, the legacy of the Polynesians is one that continues to inspire and captivate the world. As we explore their genetic journey, we realize that the Polynesian story is part of a larger narrative, the story of humankind's capacity to explore, adapt, and connect across vast distances. Their DNA, shaped by the ocean's vastness and the isolation of their islands, tells a tale of bravery, unity, and the relentless quest for discovery. And as we continue to study their unique genetic code, we are reminded that every journey leaves a mark, not just on the world, but in the very essence of who we are. The story of Polynesian DNA is far from over. With every new discovery, we unlock deeper insights into not only where they came from but also how their genetic legacy continues to shape their world today. From the vast ocean migrations of their ancestors to the modern-day Polynesian communities reclaiming their identity, their DNA carries the imprint of one of the most extraordinary human journeys ever undertaken. But what does the future hold for Polynesian genetics? Could their DNA provide answers to some of the biggest mysteries in human history? One of the most exciting areas of research is how Polynesian genetics might help us understand human adaptation to extreme environments. Unlike many other ancient civilizations, Polynesians didn't just settle one region, they mastered an entire ocean. Their ability to survive on isolated islands with limited resources suggests unique genetic adaptations that allowed them to endure harsh conditions. Scientists are investigating whether Polynesians developed specific genetic traits related to metabolism, endurance, and resistance to certain diseases, which could have broader implications for human health. If we can understand how their ancestors thrived in extreme environments, it may help researchers develop better treatments for metabolic disorders and even provide clues about how humans might adapt to life in space or other extreme habitats. Beyond health, Polynesian DNA is also helping scientists reconstruct lost chapters of human history. We now know that Polynesians made contact with South Americans nearly 800 years ago, but the full extent of their interactions remains unknown. Could there be even earlier genetic links waiting to be discovered? Did Polynesians influence other indigenous cultures beyond what we currently understand? Advances in ancient DNA sequencing may soon provide more definitive answers, revealing connections between distant populations that were once thought to be impossible. At the same time, Polynesians themselves are taking an active role in shaping the future of genetic research. In the past, many indigenous groups had little control over how their DNA was studied or used. Today, Polynesian communities are working alongside scientists to ensure that their genetic heritage is respected and protected. Programs focused on genetic sovereignty aim to give Polynesians ownership over their own genetic data, ensuring that research benefits their communities rather than exploiting them. This shift is not just about science, it's about reclaiming identity and ensuring that the Polynesian story is told with accuracy, dignity, and respect. But perhaps the most inspiring part of this journey is how Polynesians are using their genetic and cultural heritage to revive their ancient traditions. Thousands of years after their ancestors first navigated the Pacific, a new generation of Polynesians is taking to the seas once again, using the very same techniques their forebears perfected. Voyaging societies across the Pacific are relearning traditional navigation, sailing vast distances without modern technology, guided only by the stars, ocean currents, and wind patterns. These voyages are not just symbolic, they are a powerful reminder that Polynesian knowledge, just like their DNA, is an enduring force that continues to shape the world. The legacy of Polynesian DNA is not just about the past, it is alive today, in the strength of their communities, in the resilience of their people, and in the new discoveries that continue to redefine our understanding of human history. Their story is one of courage, survival, and exploration, and it stands as a testament to what humanity is capable of. The next time you look at a vast ocean, imagine the Polynesians who set sail thousands of years ago, carrying nothing but their knowledge, their traditions, and their DNA, the very blueprint of their ancestors. Their journey didn't just change their own destiny, it reshaped the map of human civilization itself. And as new research continues to uncover more about their remarkable past, one thing remains clear. The Polynesians are, and always have been, among the greatest explorers the world has ever known. The story of Polynesian DNA is more than just a tale of migration and survival. It is a living testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bond between past and present. The genetic footprint of these legendary voyages, shaped by centuries of movement across the Pacific, continues to influence their descendants in profound ways. Every cell in their body carries the memory of those who came before them, their ancestors who braved the unknown, who charted paths across endless oceans, and who built thriving civilizations on islands that once seemed unreachable. But their journey doesn't end here. With each new genetic discovery, we come closer to understanding the full story of Polynesian origins, their connections to other ancient peoples, and the hidden adaptations that allowed them to thrive where few could survive. Science is now revealing that Polynesian genetics hold valuable clues, not only about human migration but also about metabolism, endurance, and even future space exploration. Their unique adaptations may one day help researchers develop solutions to modern health challenges, from obesity to energy efficiency in extreme environments. At the same time, Polynesians are reclaiming their genetic and cultural heritage. No longer just subjects of research, they are leading the conversation about their DNA, ensuring that their story is told with respect, accuracy, and pride. The revival of traditional navigation, the resurgence of ancestral knowledge, and the protection of genetic sovereignty are all part of a movement to honor their past while shaping their future. And so, as the world looks ahead, one thing is certain: the spirit of Polynesian exploration is far from over. Just as their ancestors once sailed beyond the horizon, seeking new lands and opportunities, the next generations are forging their own path, both in science and in cultural revival. Their DNA, just like their heritage, remains a beacon of resilience, adaptability, and discovery. The Polynesian journey is a reminder that no challenge is too great, no distance too vast, and no mystery too deep. The same fearless spirit that once conquered the Pacific now stands at the frontier of genetics, history, and the future of exploration itself. And as new questions emerge, one thing remains unchanged. Polynesians were, are, and always will be among the greatest explorers the world has ever known. So, the next time you hear the waves crash against the shore or look up at the stars in the night sky, remember, these were the same waves and the same stars that guided the Polynesians across the Pacific. Their journey was written in the ocean, in the wind, and now, in their DNA. And that journey, just like the ocean itself, will never truly end. What if your DNA could unlock the secrets of your ancestors, revealing migrations, adaptations, and even traits that make your identity unique? For Russians, their DNA is like a complex puzzle, weaving together countless threads of history, migration, and cultural exchange. Russia's geography plays a pivotal role in this uniqueness. As the largest country on Earth, it spans both Europe and Asia, making it a natural crossroads of civilizations. This vast expanse has allowed different populations, from Slavic tribes to Finno-Ugric speakers and steppe nomads, to leave their genetic imprints on the people we call Russians today. But the real mystery lies deeper. Why does Russian DNA stand out compared to other populations? Why does it show both strong connections to Europe and subtle influences from Siberia and the Arctic? The answers lie in thousands of years of migration, conquest, and adaptation. Through this genetic journey, we'll explore how the history and geography of Russia are written into its DNA. From the icy tundras of the north to the fertile plains of the south, Russian genetics tell a story like no other, one of resilience, diversity, and uniqueness. Russia's unique DNA is deeply tied to its history and geography. Spanning 11 time zones and covering both Europe and Asia, Russia's vastness has made it a melting pot of cultures and genetic influences for thousands of years. The formation of modern Russian DNA began with the early Slavic tribes, who started expanding into the East European plain around the 6th to 9th century CE. But the Slavs were not the only ones to leave their mark. As they migrated eastward, they encountered and assimilated various indigenous groups, including Uralic-speaking tribes in the north and Indo-Iranian peoples in the south. These interactions introduced new genetic elements into the population, creating a blend of distinct ancestries. Geographically, Russia's position as a bridge between Europe and Asia has exposed its population to waves of migration. For centuries, nomadic steppe peoples, such as the Scythians and Sarmatians, traversed its southern regions, contributing genes linked to Indo-European and Turkic cultures. At the same time, Siberian and Finno-Ugric populations in the north added a unique Arctic and Siberian genetic influence. This blend of ancestries has resulted in a genetic mosaic, with Russian DNA carrying markers from both the east and the west. The country's geography, vast forests, expansive plains, and unforgiving tundras, helped shape the movements of people, creating distinct genetic patterns that reflect the diversity of the land itself. Russian DNA is like a tapestry woven from distinct genetic markers, each representing a different chapter in the nation's history. Among these markers, the Y-DNA haplogroups stand out as a key to understanding the paternal lineages that shaped modern Russians. One of the most dominant haplogroups in Russian men is R1A1, found in over 55% of the population. This lineage is believed to have originated in the Eurasian steppes, home to the ancient Kurgan culture. These were some of the first Indo-European speakers, known for their revolutionary domestication of horses and expansion into Europe and Asia around 3000 BCE. The presence of R1A1 ties Russians to a shared ancestry with other Eastern Slavs, as well as populations in Central Asia and even India. Another prominent haplogroup is N1C1, found in about 5% of Russians. This lineage is closely linked to Finno-Ugric and Siberian populations and reflects ancient migrations from southern Siberia into Europe around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. It is particularly prevalent in northern Russians, highlighting their connection to Arctic and Uralic peoples. The maternal story, told through mitochondrial DNA, adds another layer of complexity. Over 98% of Russians belong to West Eurasian haplogroups, underscoring their deep European roots. Interestingly, East Eurasian maternal lineages, while present, remain at low frequencies, revealing a subtle but distinct connection to Siberian populations. Autosomal DNA, which reflects a mix of genetic contributions from both parents, paints a broader picture. Russians share the closest autosomal similarities with other Eastern European populations, such as Poles, Belarusians, and Ukrainians. However, what sets them apart is the significant Siberian-like ancestry found in northern populations, which distinguishes Russians from their Slavic neighbors. These unique genetic markers not only highlight Russia's diverse ancestry, but also reveal how geography and history have shaped the nation's genetic landscape. Russia's genetic diversity is not uniform. It varies significantly between the northern and central-southern regions of the country, reflecting centuries of migration and local adaptation. This divide is one of the most striking features of Russian DNA. In the northern regions, genetic studies reveal a much higher prevalence of haplogroups associated with Finno-Ugric and Siberian populations, such as N2 and N3. These haplogroups are tied to ancient Uralic-speaking groups that inhabited these areas long before the arrival of the Slavs. In some northern populations, the frequency of N3 exceeds 35%, a stark contrast to the southern regions, where it drops below 10%. This genetic signature highlights the enduring influence of Arctic and Uralic ancestry in the north. In the central and southern regions, the genetic story shifts. Here, haplogroup R1A1 dominates, reaching frequencies of over 55%. This haplogroup is emblematic of the Slavic migration that began around the 6th century CE. The central southern population also shares a close genetic resemblance with Poles, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, underscoring their shared Slavic heritage. This divide is further reflected in autosomal DNA. Northern Russians display significant Siberian-like ancestry, with some studies estimating it to be as high as 13%. In contrast, central southern Russians show little to no Siberian influence, aligning more closely with other Eastern Europeans. Geography played a key role in shaping these genetic differences. The forests, rivers, and tundras of the north created natural barriers, preserving the genetic legacy of ancient Finno-Ugric populations. Meanwhile, the open plains of the south facilitated the migration of Slavic tribes and their assimilation of local groups. This north-south divide is not just a genetic phenomenon. It also reflects cultural and linguistic differences within Russia. Northern dialects, for example, contain traces of Finno-Ugric linguistic elements, while southern dialects are more distinctly Slavic. Together, these genetic and cultural contrasts paint a vivid picture of how Russia's vast geography has shaped its people over millennia. The genetic diversity of Russians is a direct result of the layers of ancient populations that contributed to their DNA over thousands of years. Each migration, conquest, and cultural interaction left a lasting imprint, creating the complex genetic mosaic we see today. The first major contributors were the Neolithic farmers, who arrived from the Near East about 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. They brought agricultural practices and genes that shaped the early genetic landscape of Europe, including parts of what is now Russia. These farmers introduced West Eurasian haplogroups into the gene pool, which are still prevalent in Russians today. Later, during the Bronze Age, the steppe nomads made their mark. These Indo-European-speaking populations from the Pontic-Caspian steppe spread their genes and culture across Europe and Asia. The Kurgan culture, in particular, played a significant role in this expansion, introducing the R1A1 haplogroup into Slavic populations. These nomads not only brought their genes but also influenced early Russian language and culture. In the northern regions, the assimilation of Uralic-speaking tribes left a distinct genetic signature. These tribes, who lived in the Arctic and Ural regions, contributed haplogroups like N2 and N3, which are still prevalent among northern Russians. Their influence is also evident in the Finno-Ugric substratum found in northern Russian dialects. Further south, the genetic story is different. Here, Turkic and Mongolic groups, such as the Khazars and the Golden Horde, contributed smaller but detectable amounts of steppe and Asian ancestry. These interactions, though less impactful than those in the north, added subtle genetic diversity to the southern Russian populations. The East European plain also saw waves of migration and assimilation during the Slavic expansion. From the 6th to 9th century CE, Slavic tribes spread across the region, absorbing local populations like the Baltic and Uralic speakers. This process helped solidify the genetic foundation of modern Russians, particularly in the central and southern areas. The genetic traces of these ancient populations are not just historical artifacts. They are living evidence of Russia's complex past. Each layer of ancestry, from Neolithic farmers to Bronze Age nomads and Uralic tribes, contributes to the unique genetic identity of the Russian people today. One of the most fascinating aspects of Russian DNA is the Siberian-like ancestry found primarily in northern populations. This genetic connection highlights how Russia serves as a bridge between Europe and Asia, with influences from both regions shaping its people over thousands of years. The Siberian influence can be traced back to migrations that occurred 4,000 to 8,000 years ago. Haplogroups like N1C1 and N3 are key markers of this ancestry. These lineages are closely associated with Uralic-speaking populations and ancient groups from southern Siberia, who moved into the northern regions of the East European plain. Their genes are found in high frequencies among northern Russians, distinguishing them from their central and southern counterparts. Interestingly, despite the geographic proximity to East Asia, Russian DNA shows minimal representation of typically East Asian haplogroups like Q and C. This indicates that the Siberian-like ancestry in Russians is not the result of recent gene flow from East Asia but rather an ancient connection that predates the rise of modern East Asian populations. The northern environment played a significant role in preserving this genetic legacy. Harsh Arctic climates and dense forests created natural barriers, isolating the populations of the north and maintaining the unique genetic signatures of these early settlers. Today, northern Russians share a genetic affinity with Finno-Ugric populations like the Sami, Komi, and Mari, highlighting their shared ancestry with these Arctic and Uralic groups. This Siberian-like ancestry isn't just a historical relic, it also influences the cultural and linguistic identity of northern Russians. Finno-Ugric elements in northern dialects and traditions reflect the deep connection between genetics and culture in this region. By contrast, Central and Southern Russians display little Siberian ancestry. Their DNA aligns more closely with other Eastern Slavs, such as Poles and Ukrainians, emphasizing their shared Slavic heritage. This stark genetic contrast between Northern and Southern Russians is one of the most unique features of the Russian genome. Ultimately, the Siberian influence in Russian DNA underscores the country's position as a genetic and cultural crossroads. It represents a rare blend of East and West, making Russian genetics truly one of a kind. Russian DNA is not just a biological marker, it's deeply intertwined with the nation's culture, language, and traditions. The genetic diversity of Russians reflects their history of migrations, assimilation, and adaptation, which in turn shaped their identity. In the northern regions, the genetic influence of Finno-Ugric populations is evident in more than just DNA. Northern Russian dialects, for instance, carry linguistic traces of Finno-Ugric substrata, reflecting centuries of interaction with Uralic-speaking tribes. These dialects feature unique phonetic patterns, vocabulary, and syntax that distinguish them from Central and Southern Russian speech. Meanwhile, in the Central and Southern regions, the Slavic core dominates both genetically and culturally. These areas exhibit stronger ties to other Eastern Slavs, such as Ukrainians and Belarusians, with shared traditions, language structures, and folk customs. The genetic continuity in these regions reinforces their cultural unity and their role as the heartland of the Slavic world. Religion also played a part in shaping cultural identity. The assimilation of diverse groups, Uralic, Turkic, and steppe populations, was often accompanied by the spread of Orthodox Christianity. This shared faith helped unify disparate communities under a common cultural framework, further blending their identities. Additionally, the North-South genetic divide mirrors differences in lifestyle and traditions. Northern Russians, shaped by their Finno-Ugric heritage and Arctic environment, developed unique survival strategies, food practices, and seasonal festivals suited to their harsh climates. In contrast, Southern Russians, influenced by their Slavic neighbors, share agricultural traditions, music, and cuisine that reflect a milder environment and close ties to Eastern Europe. This interplay of genetics, culture, and language highlights the unique story of Russian identity. It's a living example of how DNA isn't just about ancestry. It shapes how people live, speak, and interact with the world around them. In recent years, Russian DNA has become the center of global attention, not just for scientific discoveries but also for political and ethical debates. From cutting-edge research to privacy concerns, the role of DNA in modern Russia reveals the complexities of genetics in today's world. One of the most controversial topics is the collection and analysis of Russian DNA by foreign entities. Russian authorities have voiced concerns about foreign organizations systematically collecting DNA samples from Russians of various ethnicities. President Vladimir Putin himself raised questions about the purpose of this research, suggesting it could be linked to sensitive military or biological projects. These concerns have fueled speculation about the potential misuse of genetic data, such as the development of ethnicity-specific biological weapons. Adding to this, Russia has dramatically expanded its own state DNA database, mandating the collection of genetic information from a wide range of individuals, including those detained for minor offenses. While the government claims this is essential for crime prevention and national security, critics argue that it poses serious risks to privacy. DNA contains highly sensitive information, not only about an individual's identity but also their ethnicity, family ties, and even predisposition to certain diseases. The lack of independent oversight over the use of this data has raised alarms about potential misuse. On the scientific front, DNA studies in Russia have made groundbreaking discoveries about health, ancestry, and the genetic factors behind diseases. For instance, Russian geneticists have used DNA analysis to trace ancient migrations, uncover the origins of different ethnic groups, and identify genetic markers linked to resilience against certain diseases. These studies not only provide insight into the past but also have practical applications in medicine and public health. However, this progress comes with ethical dilemmas. The mass collection of genetic data, coupled with advancements in artificial intelligence, has created fears about the misuse of this information for surveillance or discriminatory practices. Russia's embrace of mass biometrics, including facial recognition and DNA databases, highlights the fine line between security and privacy. The modern debate over DNA in Russia underscores the powerful role genetics plays, not just in uncovering the past but in shaping the future. Whether through groundbreaking research or controversial policies, Russian DNA remains a topic of global significance. Russian DNA presents a fascinating paradox. It is simultaneously unique and deeply connected to neighboring populations. This duality reflects the complex history of migrations, cultural exchanges, and genetic blending that have shaped the nation's identity. On one hand, Russian DNA exhibits a distinct blend of Slavic and Siberian-like ancestry that sets it apart from other populations. Northern Russians, for instance, carry genetic markers linked to Uralic-speaking and Arctic populations, such as haplogroups N2 and N3, which are rare in most other Slavic groups. This Siberian influence gives Northern Russians a genetic profile that bridges the gap between Europe and Asia. At the same time, Central and Southern Russians share a strong genetic continuity with their Eastern Slavic neighbors, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Poles. This connection is most evident in the dominance of the R1A1 haplogroup, a marker of Indo-European ancestry that unites Slavic populations across Eastern Europe. This paradox becomes even more intriguing when viewed on a larger scale. Despite their unique Siberian influences, Russians belong to a broader genetic network that spans much of Europe. The majority of Russian mitochondrial DNA, over 98%, belongs to West Eurasian haplogroups, emphasizing their deep European roots. Autosomal DNA studies further confirm that Russians are most closely related to other Eastern European populations, with subtle yet significant differences that reflect their unique history. The genetic paradox also extends to cultural and linguistic connections. While Northern Russians bear the genetic and linguistic imprint of Finno-Ugric populations, Central Southern Russians maintain a strong Slavic identity, linking them to a shared cultural heritage with other Eastern Europeans. This duality, being both unique and connected, makes Russian DNA a powerful example of how genetics can tell the story of a nation. It shows that even as populations adapt and evolve in response to their environment and history, they remain tied to the broader human story. Russian DNA is more than a collection of genetic markers. It's a living chronicle of thousands of years of migrations, cultural interactions, and resilience. From the ancient Slavic tribes who laid the foundation of modern Russia to the Siberian influences in the north and the Slavic ties in the south, the genetic makeup of Russians reflects a history as vast and diverse as the country itself. What makes Russian DNA truly fascinating is its ability to unite seemingly contradictory traits. It is a unique blend of East and West, shaped by Siberian ancestry and European heritage. Yet, it also connects Russians to their Slavic neighbors, underscoring their shared history and identity. The North-South genetic divide, the influence of ancient populations, and the modern-day controversies surrounding genetic research all contribute to the complexity of this story. Russian DNA isn't just a result of historical events. It has shaped culture, language, and traditions, leaving a lasting impact on the identity of the Russian people. As science continues to uncover the secrets written in our genes, Russian DNA serves as a reminder of the power of genetics to illuminate the past and connect us to our shared humanity. So, the next time you wonder about what makes a population unique, remember that the answer might just be written in their DNA. What do you think about this fascinating journey through Russian genetics? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights into the incredible stories hidden in history, science, and culture. What if I told you that Spain's DNA holds the key to understanding thousands of years of human migration, cultural exchange, and adaptation? From ancient hunter-gatherers to steppe warriors, from Celtic tribes to North African settlers, Spain's genetic code is like a time capsule, preserving the story of an entire continent. But here's the twist. Despite its rich history of invasions and conquests, Spanish DNA remains surprisingly unique. What makes it so special? Why is it so different from its Mediterranean neighbors? Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating genetic puzzle of Spain to uncover the secrets hidden in its people's DNA. Spain has always been at the crossroads of continents, where Europe meets Africa, and the Atlantic blends into the Mediterranean. This unique geography has shaped not just its culture and history but also its people's DNA. Over thousands of years, Spain has seen waves of migrations, from early hunter-gatherers to Neolithic farmers and steppe nomads. Later, it became a melting pot of influences during the Roman Empire, the Islamic period, and the Reconquista. But here's the intriguing part. Despite being a land of such diverse movements, genetic studies reveal a surprising homogeneity among Spaniards, with a strong connection to Western Europe. Even the migrations from Africa, so close geographically, left only a modest genetic imprint compared to the cultural impact they had. So, how has Spain managed to maintain this balance of diversity and uniqueness? To answer that, we need to travel back in time, thousands of years, where the story of Spanish DNA truly begins. Let's begin with the foundations of Spanish DNA, which stretch back to the Mesolithic period, about 12,000 years ago. During this time, the Iberian Peninsula was home to small bands of hunter-gatherers. These were the first humans to settle the land, and their genetic legacy forms the earliest layer of Spanish DNA. Evidence from archaeological sites like Atapuerca has revealed fossils that connect these ancient hunter-gatherers directly to modern Spaniards. Then, around 9,000 years ago, a dramatic shift occurred. Neolithic farmers began migrating from Anatolia, bringing with them a revolutionary way of life, agriculture. This wave of migration didn't just transform the land, it left a lasting genetic mark. These early European farmers mixed with the indigenous hunter-gatherers, creating a new genetic profile. Traits such as darker hair and eyes, common in Spaniards today, are partly rooted in this ancient fusion. What's fascinating is how this genetic blend set the stage for the Iberian Peninsula to become a cradle of innovation and culture. But this was just the beginning. The real transformation came thousands of years later when a new group of people arrived, bringing with them a genetic revolution that reshaped Spain forever. Around 4,000 years ago, the Iberian Peninsula witnessed one of the most dramatic genetic shifts in its history. A group of people from the vast steppes of modern-day Russia and Ukraine migrated across Europe, eventually reaching Spain. These steppe people didn't just bring their advanced skills in metallurgy and horse domestication. They brought a genetic legacy that would completely reshape Iberian DNA. Here's the astonishing part. Within just a few generations, nearly all the male DNA in the Iberian Peninsula was replaced. The Y chromosome haplogroup R1b, which originated with these steppe people, became dominant, making up around 70% of the genetic makeup in Spain today. In regions like the Basque Country, this haplogroup is even more prevalent, reaching up to 90%. What's remarkable is that despite this massive genetic turnover, there's no evidence of widespread violence or conflict in the archaeological record. Instead, researchers believe the steppe men might have achieved dominance through social or reproductive advantages, gradually blending into existing Iberian cultures. This migration also introduced traits that are still visible today, like lighter skin tones and specific genetic markers related to height. But while the steppe people had a profound influence on Spain's genetic structure, they didn't erase the earlier layers of Iberian identity. Instead, they became another chapter in the ever-evolving story of Spanish DNA, a story that continued to unfold with the arrival of yet another wave of settlers, the Celts. As the Bronze Age came to a close, another group of people began making their way into the Iberian Peninsula, the Celts. These migrations, which occurred in two major waves during the 9th and 7th centuries BCE, brought a new layer of both cultural and genetic influence to the region. Unlike the steppe migrations, the Celts didn't completely replace the existing populations. Instead, they merged with the indigenous Iberians, forming a unique hybrid identity known as the Celtiberians. The Celts settled mostly in northern and central Spain, particularly around the Douro and Ebro River valleys. They brought with them advanced metalworking skills and unique cultural practices, some of which are still echoed in Spain's rural traditions today. Genetically, the Celtiberians shared much in common with the ancient populations of Atlantic Europe, including regions like Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. One of the clearest markers of this connection is the R1b haplogroup, which dominates the male lineage in Spain and is also common in these Atlantic regions. This genetic similarity highlights Spain's strong ties to its northern neighbors, emphasizing how Iberia has always been a key part of the broader Atlantic world. But what makes this period even more fascinating is how the Celtiberians laid the groundwork for Spain's cultural and genetic resilience. Their legacy isn't just in the DNA. It's in the way they adapted to waves of migrations while maintaining their distinct identity. However, this was just one chapter in Iberia's story. A new wave of influence would soon arrive, not from the north, but from the south, across the Strait of Gibraltar. In 711 AD, an event occurred that would leave a lasting mark on Spain's history, culture, and, to some extent, its DNA. A group of North African Berbers, led by Arab commanders, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and began the Islamic conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. Over the next 8 centuries, much of Spain became part of Al-Andalus, a flourishing society where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish cultures thrived together. From a genetic perspective, the influence of North Africa is undeniable but far more nuanced than many assume. Genetic studies show that around 10% of modern Spanish DNA can be traced back to North Africa, with the highest concentrations found in Andalusia and western Spain. This percentage is similar to what is seen in regions like southern Italy or northern France, indicating a localized rather than overwhelming genetic impact. One reason for this limited influence is that the Muslim population during the conquest was relatively small compared to the existing Iberian population. Additionally, following the Reconquista, a centuries-long effort by Christian kingdoms to reclaim the peninsula, many Muslims, known as Moriscos, were expelled or assimilated into Spanish society. This largely erased much of their direct genetic contribution, especially in regions like Granada. What's particularly fascinating is the regional variation. In areas like Salamanca, studies suggest a surprising concentration of descendants from Moriscos, likely due to forced relocations during the 16th century. On the other hand, in the Basque Country, there's almost no trace of North African DNA, highlighting how Spain's genetic makeup varies dramatically from region to region. While the genetic footprint of the Islamic period is relatively small, its cultural impact was monumental. Architecture, language, agriculture, and even science in Spain owe much to this era. This blend of cultural richness and genetic diversity is what makes Spain's DNA such an intricate puzzle, one that continued to evolve as Spain reclaimed its identity during the Reconquista. But the story doesn't end there. Spain's DNA was also shaped by its internal diversity, with regional identities that remain distinct even today. Let's explore how this regional variation adds yet another layer to the uniqueness of Spanish genetics. One of the most fascinating aspects of Spanish DNA is how much it varies between regions while still maintaining a shared genetic core. This diversity reflects Spain's unique history of migrations, conquests, and repopulations, each leaving a distinct imprint on different parts of the peninsula. Genetic studies reveal that the east-west axis in Spain shows the most significant differentiation, with populations in Galicia and Andalusia displaying notable differences from those in Catalonia and Valencia. In contrast, the north-south axis shows remarkable similarity, likely due to the Reconquista, when Christian kingdoms in the north repopulated southern regions with northern settlers. Let's start with Galicia, in the northwest corner of Spain. This region is heavily influenced by Atlantic Europe, sharing strong genetic ties with Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. Despite its distance from North Africa, Galicia has a surprising amount of North African DNA, around 11%, a legacy of the Islamic period and later migrations of Moriscos after their expulsion from other parts of Spain. Andalusia, in the south, stands as a genetic melting pot. Here, European and North African ancestry blend most prominently, a testament to the region's long history under Islamic rule. The eastern areas, like Granada, reflect the cultural richness of Al-Andalus, while the western parts, closer to Portugal, exhibit stronger North African influences. Moving to Catalonia and Valencia, these regions have a more Mediterranean profile, with less North African ancestry but a notable mix of European influences. Catalonia's genetics are also shaped by its proximity to France, with shared haplogroups linking it closely to southern French populations. Then there's the Basque Country, a region that truly stands apart. Basques are one of the most genetically distinct groups in Europe, having remained isolated since the Iron Age. Unlike other parts of Spain, Basque DNA shows almost no trace of North African influence, and their genetic profile is dominated by the R1b haplogroup, which connects them to the steppe migrations thousands of years ago. Even Spain's islands reveal unique stories. In Ibiza, for example, the population has remained genetically isolated, descending primarily from Catalan settlers in the 13th century. Meanwhile, the Canary Islands, closer to Africa than Europe, exhibit a higher percentage of North African ancestry due to their geographic location and historical connections to African trade routes. These regional differences make Spain a genetic mosaic. Each area tells a story of adaptation, migration, and survival, yet they all share a deep historical connection to the rest of Western Europe. It's this blend of shared heritage and regional uniqueness that makes Spanish DNA unlike any other in the world. But to fully understand how Spain's genetic story fits into the larger picture, we need to zoom out and explore its deep ties to Western Europe and the migrations that link it to neighboring regions. Spain is not just a genetic outlier, it's a keystone in the story of European ancestry. For thousands of years, the Iberian Peninsula has acted as both a gateway and a bridge, connecting Europe to Africa and the Atlantic. Its influence stretches far beyond its borders, leaving a genetic legacy across Western Europe and even the British Isles. One of the most fascinating discoveries in genetic research involves a group of Iberian fishermen who, around 6,000 years ago, sailed across the Atlantic to the British Isles. Studies show that the DNA of these early Iberian settlers is almost identical to the genetic makeup of modern populations in Ireland and Wales. In fact, the most common genetic fingerprint in the British Isles today, haplogroup R1b, can be traced directly back to these ancient Iberian pioneers. But Spain's role as a genetic contributor didn't stop there. During the Ice Age, populations in northern Europe were forced southward into refuges like the Iberian Peninsula. As the ice retreated, these populations expanded back into Europe, carrying Iberian genetic markers with them. This wave of migration helped shape the genetic profile of much of Western Europe, connecting regions like France, Brittany, and even parts of Scandinavia to their Iberian roots. Even in modern times, Spain's unique DNA reflects its deep ties to Western Europe. The genetic similarity between Spaniards and the populations of France, Ireland, and Portugal is remarkable. Regions like Navarre and the Basque Country, with their high frequencies of the R1b haplogroup, highlight this Atlantic connection even more strongly. However, what makes Spain so intriguing is not just its connection to Europe but also its role as a genetic crossroads. While its DNA is heavily Western European, it carries subtle traces of the Mediterranean and North African worlds, making it one of the most complex genetic profiles on the continent. This deep connection to both Europe and neighboring regions cements Spain's position as a key player in understanding human migration and adaptation. But to truly appreciate the uniqueness of Spanish DNA, we need to consider one final layer: how history has shaped not just its genes, but the cultural identity tied to them. Spain's DNA is like a living archive, a collection of stories etched into the genetic code of its people. But what makes it truly unique compared to its neighbors? It's the way this DNA reflects both deep continuity and remarkable adaptability across thousands of years. Unlike other Mediterranean countries, Spain's genetic makeup is far more aligned with Western Europe than the Eastern Mediterranean or North Africa. This is largely due to the dominance of the R1b haplogroup, which links Spaniards closely to populations in Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. Yet, it's not just the similarities that make Spanish DNA stand out. It's the diversity within its borders. From the isolated Basques, whose genetic profile has barely changed since the Iron Age, to the southern regions of Andalusia, where traces of North African ancestry remain from the Islamic period. Each part of Spain tells a slightly different story. Even regions like Galicia and the Canary Islands show how history has uniquely shaped local populations, from Celtic migrations to trade routes with Africa. Another fascinating aspect of Spanish DNA is its homogeneity compared to countries like Italy or the Balkans, where centuries of invasions created more fragmented genetic patterns. In Spain, historical migrations, whether from the steppe, the Celts, or North Africa, blended into the local population rather than overwhelming it. This balance has resulted in a genetic profile that feels both unified and deeply layered. Even today, Spanish DNA continues to intrigue researchers. Recent studies show that while Spain shares genetic connections with its European neighbors, its unique history of migrations, cultural resilience, and regional diversity makes it unlike any other country on the continent. This DNA is not just a scientific curiosity. It's a testament to the endurance and adaptability of the people who've called this land home for tens of thousands of years. As we've seen, Spain's genetic journey is deeply tied to its past. But the final layer to uncover is how modern research continues to reveal surprising insights, challenging everything we thought we knew about the history of this extraordinary land. Modern genetic research has revolutionized how we understand Spanish DNA, revealing insights that were previously hidden beneath layers of history. Advanced techniques, like autosomal DNA analysis and mitochondrial DNA studies, have provided a much clearer picture of how Spain's genetic identity evolved. And some of the findings are truly surprising. For instance, a study of over 2,000 individuals revealed that Spanish populations have stronger genetic ties to Western Europe than previously thought. Yet, regional variations tell their own story. In Ibiza, researchers discovered that the modern population is almost entirely descended from a small group of Catalan settlers from the 13th century. There's no trace of earlier invaders, like the Carthaginians or Romans, even though they dominated the island for centuries. This pattern of isolated genetic pools mirrors what is seen in places like Sardinia or Iceland. Another fascinating discovery involves Galicia. While this region has long been associated with its Celtic heritage, modern research shows a genetic footprint that ties it not only to Ireland and Wales but also to North Africa. This unexpected North African influence likely stems from migrations during the Islamic period and later resettlements of Moriscos. And let's not forget the Basques, who continue to puzzle researchers. Despite their clear steppe ancestry, their genetic profile is remarkably distinct from the rest of Europe. Studies show that their isolation since the Iron Age has preserved their unique identity, while their language, unrelated to any other in Europe, suggests a cultural resilience that matches their genetic continuity. One of the most unexpected findings comes from studies on the genetic impacts of the Islamic conquest. While the cultural influence of Al-Andalus is evident in architecture, language, and agriculture, the genetic contribution is smaller than anticipated, just around 10% in most regions. This highlights how migrations can shape societies culturally without necessarily leaving a significant genetic imprint. Finally, modern research has confirmed that Spain's DNA reflects not only ancient migrations but also the movement of people during the Middle Ages. Events like the Reconquista and the expulsion of Jews and Moriscos left a genetic imprint that remains visible today. For example, regions like Salamanca have a higher percentage of North African ancestry than Granada, a result of forced relocation centuries ago. These findings remind us that DNA is a constantly evolving story. Spain's genetic profile is not static, it's a dynamic record of migrations, adaptations, and survival. And as science continues to advance, there's no doubt we'll uncover even more layers to the fascinating history written in the genes of the Spanish people. But to truly appreciate what we've learned, let's bring everything together and reflect on why Spain's DNA stands as a unique testament to the resilience and complexity of human history. As we've journeyed through the story of Spanish DNA, one thing becomes abundantly clear. It's not just about genetics, it's about history, culture, and resilience. Spanish DNA is a living timeline, stretching back tens of thousands of years, connecting the Iberian Peninsula to ancient hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, and steppe nomads who reshaped Europe. What makes Spain's DNA so unique is its perfect balance between diversity and continuity. It tells the story of a land shaped by countless migrations, Celtic tribes, North African settlers, Roman colonists, and even medieval repopulations, all blending into a genetic mosaic that is distinctly Spanish. And yet, through it all, Spain has maintained a strong connection to its Western European roots, preserving a genetic legacy that aligns more with Ireland, Wales, and Brittany than with its Mediterranean neighbors. Each region in Spain adds its own chapter to this story, from the isolated Basques, whose DNA offers a glimpse into the past, to the melting pot of Andalusia, where Europe and Africa meet. The diversity within Spain itself is remarkable. Even regions like Galicia, Ibiza, and the Canary Islands reflect how history has shaped local identities in surprising ways. But beyond the scientific data, Spanish DNA carries a deeper lesson about humanity. It's a reminder of how interconnected we are, how migrations and exchanges have shaped not just Spain but the entire genetic landscape of Europe. It shows us that no population is pure or unchanging. Our DNA is a testament to survival, adaptation, and the blending of cultures over time. So, what makes Spanish DNA truly unique? It's not just the genetic markers or haplogroups. It's the story they tell, a story of resilience, connection, and transformation. And that's a story worth celebrating. Now, it's your turn. What do you find most fascinating about Spain's genetic story? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love uncovering the hidden stories of history and science, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of human genetics. Who were the ancient Sumerians? And where did they come from? For centuries, historians and archaeologists have debated the origins of this mysterious civilization that emerged over 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. Some theories suggest they were migrants from distant lands, while others believe they were indigenous to the region. But now, cutting-edge genetic research is finally uncovering the truth, and the findings are nothing short of astonishing. The Sumerians are often credited with shaping the foundation of human civilization. They built massive cities, developed one of the first writing systems, and pioneered advances in mathematics, law, and agriculture. But their identity has always been shrouded in mystery. Unlike their neighbors, the Akkadians and Babylonians, who spoke Semitic languages, the Sumerians spoke an isolated language, unrelated to any known linguistic family. This linguistic anomaly led many to believe they were a foreign people who migrated to Mesopotamia. However, ancient Sumerian texts tell a different story, one where their cities, such as Eridu, Ur, and Uruk, were established under divine guidance, tracing their origins to the very land they cultivated. The real breakthrough in solving this mystery comes from genetic studies. Scientists have analyzed the DNA of the Marsh Arabs, a population living in the Mesopotamian marshlands, who are believed to be the closest living descendants of the Sumerians. By examining their Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, researchers have traced their genetic roots deep into the Middle East. The results show that the Sumerians were overwhelmingly of indigenous Mesopotamian origin, with no significant genetic links to South Asia, India, or the Indus Valley civilization. This finding directly challenges older theories suggesting that the Sumerians migrated from regions like modern-day Pakistan or Iran. One of the most fascinating genetic markers found in Marsh Arabs is the J1 page 08 Y chromosome lineage, which shows a local expansion around 4,000 years ago. This timeline coincides perfectly with the rise of Sumerian city-states, suggesting a strong, continuous genetic presence in the region. This means that the ancestors of the Sumerians were not outsiders who arrived from a distant land but were part of an evolving civilization that thrived along the Tigris and Euphrates for thousands of years. But if the Sumerians were truly indigenous, why did they seem so different from their neighbors? The answer may lie in their early development of urban societies and advanced agricultural techniques. Unlike the surrounding nomadic tribes, the Sumerians settled in one place, cultivating land and building cities that eventually became cultural and technological powerhouses. This societal structure may have isolated their language and traditions, making them appear distinct from other groups in the region. The discovery of their genetic roots does more than just confirm their origins. It connects the dots between the ancient world and the present day. It proves that the bloodline of one of humanity's first great civilizations still runs through the veins of people living in the marshes of southern Iraq today. The mystery of the Sumerians' origin is no longer just a historical question. It is a story written in the DNA of their descendants, waiting to be read. Over 6,000 years ago, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a civilization emerged that would change the course of human history. The Sumerians built the world's first great cities, pioneered advanced agriculture, and developed writing systems that would influence generations to come. But how did they rise to such greatness? What set them apart from the rest of the ancient world? The region of Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, was both a blessing and a challenge for early settlers. The floodplains provided fertile soil, but the unpredictable nature of the rivers required innovation. The Sumerians mastered irrigation, constructing canals and reservoirs to control the water supply and sustain their crops. This surplus of food allowed for population growth, specialization of labor, and the development of complex societies. Unlike nomadic tribes, Sumerians settled in permanent cities, each with its own ruler, government, and temple at its center. The earliest of these cities, Eridu, was founded around 5400 BCE and held deep religious significance. The Sumerians believed it was the first city created by the gods, and its temples were rebuilt over centuries, layer upon layer, marking its enduring importance. But Eridu was only the beginning. Over time, more cities rose: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Kish, each one contributing to the rapid advancement of civilization. By 3100 BCE, Uruk had become the largest city in the world, with a population of nearly 80,000 people at a time when the entire human population was only around 15 million. One of the Sumerians' most remarkable achievements was the invention of cuneiform writing. Initially developed for record-keeping in trade and agriculture, it soon evolved into a tool for storytelling, law, and education. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest known literary works, was written in this script, preserving the myths, history, and beliefs of the Sumerians for future generations. But with great advancements came challenges. As cities expanded, competition for resources led to conflicts between city-states. Kings emerged as powerful rulers, often claiming divine authority to justify their rule. Despite the wars and rivalries, Sumer remained a beacon of innovation, influencing neighboring civilizations like the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. The rise of Sumer was not just the birth of a civilization, it was the dawn of human progress. Their contributions to agriculture, governance, writing, and architecture laid the foundation for the world we live in today. And while their empire eventually faded, their legacy continues to shape history. For centuries, the origins of the Sumerians remained one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Were they native to Mesopotamia, or did they migrate from a distant land? Historians, archaeologists, and linguists debated the possibilities. But now, cutting-edge genetic research has finally provided answers. The study of ancient DNA has uncovered surprising details about the Sumerians' true ancestry, rewriting what we thought we knew about this remarkable civilization. To trace the genetic lineage of the Sumerians, researchers turned to the Marsh Arabs, a population living in the Mesopotamian marshlands of southern Iraq. These people have long been considered the closest living descendants of the Sumerians due to their way of life, which has remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. By analyzing both Y-chromosome DNA, which is passed down through the male line, and mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, inherited through the mother, scientists were able to reconstruct the genetic history of this region. The results revealed a dominant Middle Eastern genetic component, suggesting that the Sumerians were indigenous to Mesopotamia rather than migrants from another region. The study found that the Y-chromosome lineage J1 page 08, a haplogroup strongly associated with the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East, showed a significant local expansion around 4,000 years ago, coinciding with the peak of the Sumerian civilization. This means that rather than being invaders or outsiders, the Sumerians likely evolved as part of the native Mesopotamian population. Mitochondrial DNA analysis also supports this theory. While there were minor genetic influences from South Asia and Africa, they were not significant enough to suggest mass migration or large-scale intermixing. This effectively rules out the theory that the Sumerians came from the Indus Valley or any other distant civilization. Instead, their genetic makeup aligns closely with other ancient Middle Eastern populations, reinforcing the idea that they were deeply rooted in the land where their civilization flourished. But what about the theory that they descended from mountain tribes in the northeast, such as the Zagros Mountains? Genetic data suggests that while some northern Mesopotamian influences existed, they were minimal compared to the dominant southern Mesopotamian gene pool. This means that while trade and cultural exchange may have occurred, it did not significantly impact the Sumerian genetic identity. These findings have major implications. The Sumerians were not a mysterious foreign group. They were a people who had lived in Mesopotamia for thousands of years, gradually developing the first great civilization known to history. The Marsh Arabs, despite centuries of cultural change, still carry the genetic legacy of their ancestors, making them living proof of the Sumerians' enduring presence. Genetics has done what history alone could not. It has provided a clear and scientific answer to one of the world's most enduring questions. The origins of the Sumerians are no longer a mystery. They are embedded in the very DNA of the land they once ruled. For centuries, scholars have debated where the Sumerians came from. Their language was unlike any other in the region. Their culture was advanced beyond their time, and their cities seemed to emerge almost overnight. Some believed they migrated from the distant Indus Valley, while others thought they descended from the mountains of the northeast. But now, modern genetic research has finally provided answers, separating myths from reality. One of the most popular theories suggested that the Sumerians came from South Asia, possibly the Indus Valley civilization. This idea stemmed from trade links between Mesopotamia and the Indus region, as well as similarities in certain cultural aspects, such as water management and city planning. However, DNA analysis has debunked this theory. While minor South Asian genetic markers exist in Mesopotamian populations, they are not strong enough to suggest large-scale migration. The Sumerians were not settlers from the Indus Valley. They were already in Mesopotamia long before these trade routes flourished. Another theory claimed that the Sumerians descended from the northeastern mountains, such as the Zagros region. Some believed they migrated down into Mesopotamia, bringing advanced agricultural techniques and knowledge. However, genetic evidence shows little northern influence in the Sumerian gene pool. While some cultural exchange likely occurred, the dominant genetic markers found in Marsh Arabs, a population considered the closest descendants of the Sumerians, indicate a strong local Mesopotamian ancestry. The most scientifically supported theory is that the Sumerians were indigenous to Mesopotamia. Y chromosome analysis has revealed a strong presence of J1 page 08, a haplogroup that expanded in the region around 4,000 years ago, aligning perfectly with the rise of the Sumerian city-states. Mitochondrial DNA also confirms a deep-rooted Middle Eastern origin, with no significant outside influence. This means the Sumerians were not migrants but an ancient population that evolved within Mesopotamia itself, developing their civilization over thousands of years. The debate about the origins of the Sumerians lasted for centuries, fueled by linguistic mysteries and cultural anomalies. But thanks to modern genetics, we now have a definitive answer. The Sumerians were not from India, not from Central Asia, and not from the northern mountains. They were native to the land they built their civilization upon. Their legacy is still alive today in the people of southern Iraq, whose DNA holds the secrets of one of history's greatest civilizations. The Sumerians were pioneers in trade, culture, and technology. But one of their most fascinating obsessions was with a single, deep blue stone, lapis lazuli. They adorned their temples, jewelry, and statues with this rare mineral, believing it to be the material of the gods. But what makes this so significant? Lapis lazuli was not found in Mesopotamia. It had to be imported from a distant land, and this has led some to speculate whether the Sumerians had origins far beyond the Tigris and Euphrates. Could their deep connection to this stone reveal something about where they truly came from? The only known source of high-quality lapis lazuli in the ancient world was the Sare Sang mines in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan. This means that, as early as 3000 BCE, Sumerians had already established long-distance trade networks stretching over 1,000 miles. Some scholars have argued that this trade connection might suggest a migration link between Central Asia and Mesopotamia, proposing that the Sumerians originally came from the east before settling in Mesopotamia. However, genetic research tells a different story. While the Sumerians were deeply connected to the Afghanistan region through trade, DNA evidence does not support a direct ancestral link between the two civilizations. The genetic markers found in modern-day Marsh Arabs, the closest living descendants of the Sumerians, do not show a strong South or Central Asian influence. This suggests that while the Sumerians imported goods from the Hindu Kush, they did not originate from there. Instead, Their use of lapis lazuli was part of a flourishing trade system rather than evidence of their migration. Lapis lazuli also played a spiritual role in Sumerian mythology. The gods' celestial palaces were believed to be made of lapis, and it was often associated with divinity and power. This symbolism continued into later civilizations, including the Egyptians, who also revered the stone. But the connection to lapis was not because the Sumerians came from Afghanistan. It was because they saw its deep blue color, streaked with gold, as a representation of the heavens and the cosmos. The evidence is clear. The Sumerians did not migrate from Central Asia. Their fascination with lapis lazuli was a reflection of their advanced trade networks and religious beliefs, not their genetic origins. The stone may have come from Afghanistan, but the people who cherished it were deeply rooted in the land of Mesopotamia. The Sumerians were not only brilliant engineers and city builders but also master storytellers. Their myths and legends, written in cuneiform on clay tablets, have influenced cultures for thousands of years. But one story stands out, a tale of a catastrophic flood that wiped out humanity. Eerily similar to the biblical story of Noah's Ark known as the Eridu Genesis, this ancient Sumerian flood myth raises an important question. Was this just a religious tale, or is there scientific evidence behind it? The Eridu Genesis tells of a time when the gods created humans to work and serve them. But as the population grew, humans became too noisy, disturbing the gods. Enlil, the chief deity, decided to destroy humanity with a great flood. However, the god Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom, secretly warned a mortal man named Ziusudra, instructing him to build a massive boat to save himself, his family, and animals from the impending disaster. When the waters finally receded, Ziusudra made an offering to the gods, and as a reward, he was granted eternal life. This story, which predates the biblical account of Noah's Ark by more than 1,000 years, suggests that the idea of a great flood was deeply rooted in Mesopotamian history. But was this event purely mythological, or did a real flood inspire these legends? Geological and archaeological evidence suggests that catastrophic flooding did occur in Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which were central to Sumerian civilization, were prone to massive floods. Excavations at ancient Sumerian cities such as Ur and Kish have uncovered thick layers of silt and mud, indicating that a major flood covered large parts of Mesopotamia around 2900 BCE. This aligns closely with the timeline of the Eridu Genesis and could explain why flood myths became a key part of Sumerian belief systems. But what caused such a flood? Some scientists believe that melting glacier and rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age may have led to periodic flooding in the region. Others suggest that shifting river courses and intense rainfall could have triggered massive surges of water, overwhelming Sumerian settlements. Unlike a global flood, as described in later religious texts, the Sumerian flood was likely a localized but devastating event, which the survivors immortalized through myth. The similarities between the Eridu Genesis and later flood stories, including the biblical tale of Noah and the Epic of Gilgamesh, suggest that the Sumerian version was the original source of this widespread legend. As civilizations interacted and exchanged stories, the flood myth evolved, adapting to different cultures and religions over time. So, was the Sumerian flood story real? In a way, yes. While the gods and divine interventions may have been symbolic, the scientific evidence confirms that major floods did reshape Mesopotamia, leaving a lasting impact on the people who lived there. What began as a historical event became a legend, passed down through generations, eventually influencing some of the most famous religious texts in history. The Sumerians were pioneers in many aspects of civilization, but what can their genetics tell us about their society? Modern DNA analysis has not only revealed their origins but has also uncovered fascinating details about how gender roles shaped their genetic structure. From social traditions to marriage practices, the genetic makeup of the Sumerians provides a rare glimpse into how their society functioned beyond what ancient texts reveal. One of the most striking findings from DNA research is the high degree of male genetic homogeneity in the Sumerian population. This means that the Y chromosome lineages, which are passed from father to son, were highly concentrated within a few dominant male lineages. In contrast, mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited from the mother, showed more diversity. This suggests that while Sumerian men largely descended from a stable, localized population, women may have come from a wider geographical range. The most logical explanation for this pattern lies in Sumerian marriage customs and social structure. Sumerian society was strongly patrilocal, meaning that men remained in their birthplaces while women moved in from other regions after marriage. This practice was common in ancient Mesopotamian societies, where family lines and inheritance were passed through the male lineage. Additionally, polygamy among the elite and ruling class may have contributed to the concentration of specific Y chromosome lineages over generations. Another fascinating aspect of the Sumerian genetic structure is the relative absence of outside male influences. Unlike later civilizations that saw constant invasions and mixing of warrior classes, the Sumerians had a more stable and isolated genetic pool. This means that their ruling families and leading societal figures were likely part of long-established bloodlines, maintaining power through inheritance rather than conquest. This genetic pattern aligns well with historical records. Sumerian kingship was often hereditary, passed down from father to son. Ancient texts also mention marriages between ruling families of different city-states, which may explain the presence of some genetic diversity in maternal lineages. However, unlike societies that were frequently overrun by foreign invaders, the Sumerians appear to have preserved a strong and continuous male lineage for much of their civilization's history. Genetic research has confirmed that the Sumerians were not just a mix of various migrating groups. They were a deeply rooted, structured society where gender roles influenced population genetics. Their patrilocal traditions, royal bloodlines, and social customs all played a role in shaping their civilization's stability and longevity. And while their empire eventually faded, their DNA continues to tell the untold stories of a society that laid the foundations for much of human civilization. For centuries, the origins of the Sumerians remained one of history's most perplexing mysteries. Their language was unlike any other. Their cities emerged seemingly out of nowhere, and their culture laid the foundation for future civilizations. Were they an isolated group native to Mesopotamia, or did they migrate from a distant land? After years of speculation, modern science has finally uncovered the truth. Genetic studies have now confirmed that the Sumerians were not an outside group that arrived in Mesopotamia from the Indus Valley, Central Asia, or the Zagros Mountains. The strongest genetic link connects them directly to indigenous Middle Eastern populations, particularly those of Mesopotamia. DNA analysis of the Marsh Arabs, considered to be the closest living descendants of the Sumerians, has revealed a high frequency of the J1 page 08 Y chromosome haplogroup, which expanded in Mesopotamia around 4,000 years ago. This timeline perfectly matches the rise of the Sumerian city-states, proving that they were a civilization that developed from within the region, not from outside migration. Mitochondrial DNA findings further support this, showing that maternal lineages were more diverse, likely due to patrilocal customs where men stayed in their ancestral lands while women were brought in from neighboring regions. However, even this maternal diversity does not indicate large-scale migration, only local integration. This effectively debunks theories suggesting a mass movement from South Asia or other distant areas. The lack of foreign genetic markers in Sumerian DNA also explains why their language was an isolate, unrelated to neighboring Semitic or Indo-European tongues. Their genetic stability over generations meant they had fewer external influences, allowing their linguistic and cultural traditions to remain distinct. While trade networks stretched as far as the Indus Valley and Afghanistan, and cultural exchanges undoubtedly took place, the Sumerians themselves were firmly rooted in Mesopotamia. Their innovations in agriculture, city-building, writing, and governance were not the result of external influence but of internal development. The final verdict is clear. The Sumerians were indigenous to Mesopotamia. The myths of migration have been replaced with scientific evidence, proving that this civilization was born, thrived, and declined all within the lands of present-day Iraq. Their DNA still survives in the people of the region, a lasting testament to one of humanity's first great societies. What if I told you that the DNA of Turkish people is like a living map, tracing the paths of ancient migrations, the rise and fall of empires, and the blending of cultures across thousands of years? Turkey, a land situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, holds within its borders not just centuries of history, but also a genetic story that connects continents and civilizations in ways you'd never imagine. Imagine uncovering the secrets of Neolithic farmers who shaped Europe, the influence of Turkic migrations from Central Asia, and the lasting genetic imprints of ancient Anatolian empires. Turkish DNA is unlike any other. It's a mosaic of ancestry that reflects a unique combination of history, geography, and culture. But how did this genetic signature come to be? What makes it so distinct from neighboring regions? In this video, we'll unravel the mystery of why Turkish DNA is so unique. From groundbreaking genetic studies to the fascinating stories hidden within haplogroups, we'll explore what makes Turkey's genetic heritage not only special but crucial to understanding the broader history of humanity. Stay tuned, because by the end of this journey, you'll see how Turkish DNA isn't just about the past. It's a key to understanding our shared human story. Let's dive in. Turkey's location is no accident when it comes to its incredible genetic diversity. Situated at the meeting point of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, it has always been more than just a bridge between continents. It's been a destination, a melting pot, and a home to countless civilizations. For over 10,000 years, people have traveled through Anatolia, bringing with them their cultures, languages, and, of course, their DNA. This land has witnessed the migrations of Neolithic farmers who revolutionized agriculture, the Hittites who left their mark on early civilization, and empires like the Byzantines and Romans, who forever altered the cultural landscape. But the story doesn't end there. In the 11th century, the Turkic migrations added another chapter to Anatolia's history. These groups introduced a new language, culture, and genetic contributions, blending with the people who had been rooted here for centuries. What's fascinating is how Turkey's unique position turned it into more than just a crossroads. It became a genetic archive. Every migration, every empire, and every cultural shift left behind a trace in the DNA of modern Turkish people. It's this extraordinary blend of influences that sets Turkish DNA apart and makes it such a compelling subject for genetic research. And here's the real question. How much of that history is still visible in the genetic makeup of modern-day Turkey? To answer that, we need to look deeper into the composition of Turkish DNA and what it reveals about the connections that link us all. When scientists analyze the DNA of modern Turkish people, they uncover a fascinating mosaic, a genetic signature that blends ancestry from multiple regions across thousands of years. The genetic composition of Turkey today reflects a long history of migrations, interactions, and exchanges that shaped the land and its people. One of the most striking findings is the degree of genetic diversity within Turkey. Studies show that Turkish DNA connects deeply to regions like the Balkans, the Middle East, and Central Asia, with smaller yet significant links to South Asia. What's fascinating is how these layers of ancestry overlap, forming a complex genetic profile unique to Turkey. Another unique feature is how this diversity creates a sense of unity within the Turkish population. Despite contributions from so many regions, studies show that modern Turkey's genetic structure is remarkably homogeneous. This suggests that over time, extensive intermarriages and movements within Anatolia led to genetic blending, erasing clear distinctions that might otherwise exist between regions. But beyond percentages and patterns, Turkish DNA tells a deeper story, one of resilience and adaptation. From the earliest civilizations in Anatolia to later migrations from Central Asia, Turkish DNA reflects the survival and synthesis of human populations through some of history's most transformative eras. This genetic richness not only defines the uniqueness of Turkish DNA but also positions Turkey as a vital link in understanding human history on a global scale. One of the most remarkable aspects of Turkish DNA lies in its rare genetic variants. These unique markers not only highlight Turkey's distinct genetic profile but also open doors to groundbreaking scientific discoveries. In a major study of over 3,000 Turkish individuals, researchers identified that 21% of the genetic variants found in Turkish DNA are unique to this population, a significant figure compared to most other regions. These rare variants often appear in the form of homozygous loss-of-function mutations, which have the potential to reveal new insights into genetic diseases. To further explore these findings, scientists created the Turkish Variome, a comprehensive catalog of genetic data exclusive to Turkey. This variome is not just a scientific achievement, it's a powerful tool for understanding hereditary diseases and advancing personalized medicine. Researchers can now trace conditions that may disproportionately affect the Turkish population and find solutions tailored to their unique genetic makeup. What's also fascinating is how these variants help scientists trace historical gene flow. By analyzing rare mutations, researchers can better understand how Turkey's genetic diversity came to exist, linking ancient Anatolian populations, Balkan migrations, and Central Asian influences into one cohesive story. But it's not just history or health that makes these rare variants so significant. They also serve as a testament to the incredible genetic adaptability of the Turkish population, a people who have thrived for thousands of years at the intersection of countless migrations and cultural shifts. This uniqueness isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's proof that Turkey's genetic legacy is as complex and extraordinary as its history itself. When discussing Turkish DNA, the influence of Central Asia often takes center stage. The arrival of Turkic-speaking Oghuz groups in the 10th and 11th centuries brought not only linguistic and cultural changes but also genetic contributions that still resonate in modern Turkey. Studies show that the Central Asian genetic contribution to Turkish DNA ranges between 9% and 30%, depending on whether maternal, paternal, or autosomal markers are analyzed. This variability reflects how migration and intermarriage blended Turkic DNA with the rich genetic tapestry of Anatolia's existing populations. One fascinating detail is how genetic studies differentiate the Turkic influence from linguistic and cultural ties. For instance, while the Turkish language has strong Central Asian roots, the genetic footprint of these migrations was less overwhelming than some might expect. Instead of completely replacing local populations, the Oghuz Turks integrated into the Anatolian region, blending their DNA with people who had lived there for millennia. Even more intriguing is how this blending mirrors historical patterns. For example, studies of ancient populations like the Xiongnu from Mongolia, a group believed to have connections to early Turkic peoples, reveal genetic links between Central Asia and regions farther west, including Anatolia. This demonstrates that connections between East and West Eurasia predate the Oghuz migrations by thousands of years. But while the Central Asian contribution may seem modest in percentage, its impact is significant. It introduced not just genetic markers but also cultural traits that transformed Anatolia, setting the foundation for the rise of empires like the Seljuks and Ottomans. These genetic traces are a reminder of how even small migrations can leave lasting marks on history. The Central Asian legacy in Turkish DNA is a perfect example of how human populations adapt, evolve, and merge over time, creating a story far richer than any single origin. Before the Turkic migrations, Anatolia had already been home to some of the most ancient civilizations in human history. The DNA of modern Turkish people contains echoes of these early populations, providing a direct link to the Neolithic farmers and ancient Anatolians who shaped the region thousands of years ago. One of the most significant genetic legacies comes from the Neolithic Revolution, when early Anatolian farmers spread agriculture to Europe and beyond. These farmers carried unique genetic markers that can still be traced in the DNA of both modern Europeans and Turkish people. This connection suggests that Anatolia was not just a bridge for migration but also a starting point for cultural and genetic innovation. Studies of mitochondrial DNA, passed down maternally, have revealed striking continuity between ancient Anatolians and present-day Turks. For example, haplogroups like J2, associated with early farming communities, are still highly prevalent in Turkey today. This shows that despite later migrations, the core genetic makeup of Anatolia's ancient populations remains deeply embedded in the region's modern DNA. But the legacy of ancient Anatolians goes beyond genetics. They left behind a cultural and architectural heritage that shaped the civilizations that followed. From the Hittites to the Phrygians, these early populations played a critical role in the development of the region's identity, an influence that is still reflected in Turkey's genetic and cultural fabric. What's truly remarkable is how this ancient genetic continuity coexists with the diverse contributions from later migrations. It's a testament to the resilience of Anatolian populations, who absorb new influences while preserving the core of their heritage. The DNA of modern Turkish people is not just a blend of global ancestries, it's a living reminder of the civilizations that laid the foundation for human progress in this historic land. To truly understand the uniqueness of Turkish DNA, we have to look at haplogroups, genetic markers that trace deep ancestral lineages through the Y chromosome, paternal, and mitochondrial DNA, maternal. These haplogroups act like timestamps in human history, mapping the migrations and cultural exchanges that shaped the genetic makeup of the modern Turkish population. One of the most common haplogroups in Turkey is J2, which has its origins in the Fertile Crescent and is closely linked to early Anatolian farmers. This haplogroup not only reflects the agricultural revolution that began here but also the spread of farming to Europe, connecting Turkish people to one of humanity's most transformative periods. Another prominent haplogroup is R1b, which is widespread across Europe and ties Turkish DNA to ancient populations in the Balkans and Central Europe. Meanwhile, R1a, also present in Turkey, traces its lineage to regions farther east, hinting at interactions with steppe populations. From Central Asia, haplogroups like Q and LP, providing direct evidence of the Turkic migrations that brought new cultural and genetic influences to Anatolia. While their overall contribution is smaller than some might expect, these haplogroups are crucial in marking the genetic legacy of the Oghuz Turks. On the maternal side, mitochondrial haplogroups like H and U dominate, with both being widely distributed across Europe and West Asia. Interestingly, haplogroup T, which appears at high frequencies in Turkey, has links to the Caucasus and ancient populations in the region, further highlighting Anatolia's role as a genetic crossroads. What makes these haplogroups fascinating is how they overlap with historical events. Each one tells a story of migration, adaptation, and survival, whether it's the Neolithic farmers spreading agriculture, the steppe nomads traveling westward, or the Central Asian Turkic tribes blending into Anatolia's existing population. Together, these haplogroups reveal the layers of ancestry that make Turkish DNA so unique. It's not just a mix of genes, it's a living archive of human history, where every marker connects to a moment in time that shaped the world as we know it. One of the most fascinating discoveries about Turkish DNA is the high level of genetic homogeneity across the country. Despite its vast geography and diverse cultural influences, modern Turkey's population shows remarkable genetic consistency. This means that people from different regions, whether they are from Istanbul, Kayseri, or Aydin, share a similar genetic profile. How did this happen? The answer lies in centuries of intermarriage and migration within Anatolia. Unlike populations that remained isolated, the people of Turkey experienced continuous movement and blending, creating a unified genetic structure. This process erased sharp regional genetic differences, leaving behind a population that appears surprisingly cohesive in its DNA. But genetic homogeneity doesn't mean lack of diversity. In fact, the opposite is true. Turkey's genetic profile reflects a rich history of admixture from neighboring regions, including the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. It's this unique combination of historical blending and modern-day uniformity that makes Turkey's population genetically distinct. Another interesting finding comes from studies of runs of homozygosity, ROH, which measure long stretches of identical genes inherited from both parents. Turkish populations show moderate levels of ROH, often linked to historical patterns of inbreeding in smaller or isolated communities. This insight not only helps us understand Turkey's genetic past but also provides valuable data for medical research, especially in identifying genetic diseases. What's even more intriguing is that Turkey's genetic homogeneity doesn't erase its links to other populations. Studies show close relationships with neighboring Balkan and Caucasian groups, reinforcing the idea that Turkey is both a genetic melting pot and a bridge between continents. In a way, the genetic uniformity of modern Turkey serves as a reminder of the country's incredible history. It's a testament to the blending of civilizations, the movement of people, and the enduring connections that define Anatolia as one of the most significant crossroads in human history. Turkey's genetic story wouldn't be complete without understanding the role of admixture and genetic drift, two powerful forces that have shaped the DNA of its people over millennia. Admixture occurs when populations with different genetic backgrounds mix, and in Turkey, this process has been continuous and extensive. From the arrival of Neolithic farmers to the migrations of Turkic-speaking groups, and even the movements of people during the Roman and Ottoman empires, each wave of migration contributed to the genetic blend we see today. This rich history of interactions is why Turkish DNA reflects ancestries from regions as diverse as the Balkans, the Caucasus, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Genetic drift, on the other hand, works in more subtle ways. Over time, small population groups, often isolated or bottlenecked, experience changes in their genetic diversity due to chance. In Turkey, certain regions may have experienced genetic drift during periods of reduced mobility or social isolation, especially in rural or mountainous areas. This is visible in the presence of rare genetic variants that are unique to certain communities. What makes Turkey's genetic structure so fascinating is how these two processes work together. Admixture brought a wealth of diversity, while genetic drift preserved rare variants and localized traits. This combination created a genetic profile that is both globally connected and uniquely Turkish. For example, the presence of runs of homozygosity, ROH, in Turkish DNA highlights how some populations experienced genetic bottlenecks in the past, while others maintained genetic diversity through admixture. This duality helps explain why Turkish DNA has both a high degree of genetic blending and distinct characteristics that stand out in global comparisons. Ultimately, the role of admixture and genetic drift underscores the complexity of Turkey's genetic legacy. It's not just the result of one migration or one empire, it's the culmination of countless interactions, blending the past into a genetic tapestry that is as intricate as the country's history itself. Turkish DNA isn't just a fascinating record of history, it's also a treasure trove for modern science and medicine. The genetic studies conducted on Turkey's population have uncovered critical insights that are shaping the future of medical research, both within Turkey and globally. One groundbreaking achievement is the development of the Turkish variome. This comprehensive catalogue of genetic variations unique to the Turkish population has revolutionized how scientists approach genetic diseases. Rare and unique variants identified in the Turkish variome have already provided clues about hereditary conditions and how they manifest in this region. These findings are paving the way for personalized medicine, where treatments can be tailored to an individual's genetic profile. A key discovery from Turkish DNA research involves homozygous loss-of-function mutations, rare genetic changes that result in inactive or non-functional genes. These mutations are invaluable to scientists because they help reveal the function of specific genes and their role in diseases. Turkish populations, due to their unique genetic structure and history, have proven to be a critical resource in identifying these mutations. Another scientific breakthrough comes from using Turkish DNA for genome-wide association studies, GWAS. By analyzing the genetic markers in Turkish populations, researchers can identify risk factors for common diseases like cardiovascular conditions, diabetes, and neurological disorders. These studies don't just benefit Turkey, they contribute to global databases and advance our understanding of human health on a broader scale. But it's not just about rare diseases. The genetic diversity found in Turkey's population also offers clues about how people adapt to their environments over time. For example, certain genetic markers related to metabolic conditions or immune system function may have evolved as a response to environmental challenges, such as food availability or exposure to pathogens. The significance of Turkish DNA extends far beyond its borders. It's helping scientists connect the dots between ancient populations, modern health, and the future of genetics. As researchers continue to analyze Turkey's genetic landscape, it's clear that this unique population holds answers to some of the most pressing questions in medicine and human biology. Turkish DNA isn't just a story of the past, it's a key to unlocking the future of science. So, what is it that makes Turkish DNA truly unique? It's not just the numbers or percentages, it's the incredible story that those numbers tell. Turkish DNA is a living chronicle of humanity's history, shaped by migrations, empires, and the blending of cultures over thousands of years. At its core, Turkish DNA reflects a remarkable mosaic of ancestries. It's a mix of European, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Central Asian lineages, layered with contributions from ancient Anatolian populations and later migrations. But what sets it apart is the way these influences have come together, creating a population that is both genetically diverse and uniquely cohesive. The rare genetic variants found in Turkey tell a story of adaptation and survival. These markers don't just connect the Turkish people to their past, they are helping scientists uncover new insights into genetic diseases and the development of personalized medicine. It's a powerful reminder that our DNA isn't just about where we come from, it's also about where we're going. Then there's the cultural and historical significance. Turkey's location as a crossroads of civilizations meant that it wasn't just a land people passed through. It was a place where they stayed, mixed, and thrived. This blending is what makes Turkish DNA a genetic time capsule, preserving the imprints of ancient farmers, steppe nomads, and powerful empires. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing about Turkish DNA is how it reminds us of the connections that unite us all. Despite its unique features, Turkish DNA also highlights the shared threads of humanity, showing how people from different regions and backgrounds have come together throughout history to shape the world we live in today. So, whether you're fascinated by genetics, history, or the ways in which our past informs our future, Turkish DNA is a story worth exploring. It's a testament to the resilience of humanity, the power of connection, and the beauty of diversity. What surprised you the most about the genetic makeup of Turkey? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this journey into the science of DNA and history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's so much more to uncover about the stories hidden in our DNA, and we can't wait to explore them with you.